day between the two of you. Can I first of all welcome members of the public and the press to today's meeting, and can I remind councillors and officers to use microphones and request that those attending the meeting ensure that all mobile phones and other communication devices are in silent mode. Can I also remind you that the meeting will be recorded and be available on YouTube via the Council's website following this meeting. Now, I understand there are 4 apologies this morning: Councillor Band, Councillor Brock, Councillor Dugan and Councillor Gray. Are there any other apologies? No. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Clark.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Provost. A declaration of interest in item P1 as a member of the relevant board, non-financial interest.
Councillor McCall.
Stop touching that one. Thank you, Provost. I have a non-financial interest in item 6 as a member of the Perth City Development Board.
Councillor Robertson. Now, before we go on to item 3, Councillor Murray Lyle would like to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Provost. Colleagues, as most of you will know, there was a general election last week, and some of you may even be aware that Councillor Dugan was elected to represent the Angus constituency in the UK Parliament. And I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the administration to congratulate him on his new appointment and to wish him well in his new role. On a further point, really, I'm sure that he will familiarise himself with the farmers of Angus very quickly, but if he needs any help with potato yields and wheat yields and field sizes, I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Hang on. Councillor Grant, fleeing.
Still, only 7 years in. I'd like to, on Dave's behalf, thank Murray for his kind words, but I also would like to say that it's not all about the winning when it comes to it's the people who are braver than me, and there's 3 of them in this room here: Councillor Barrett, Councillor McCall, and Councillor Forbes, who put their head above the parapet and campaigned hard and well, and I think that for doing that and helping democracy, they have my utmost respect. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. On item 3, there is a notice of motion in terms of Standing Order 39, the payment of the new real living wage rate. Can I invite Councillors Bailey and McDade to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to propose that this Council once again passes on the increase in the real living wage rate early. In doing so, we are recognising that the rate was set in November based on inflationary pressures that have already hit wallets. Therefore, I formally move this motion, which reads: Council notes that an increase in the real living wage rate to £9.30 an hour was announced by the Real Living Wage Foundation in early November. This increase takes into account higher transport costs, private rents and council tax bills that have already hit the pockets of our staff. As an accredited living wage employer, Council would ordinarily pass this new rate on effective 1st of May 2020. Council instead agrees to pay the new £9.30 per hour real living wage rate effective 1st of November 2019. The cost of doing so will be £26,000 to be funded from the projected underspend in the unfunded pension budget, which was reported to SP&R Committee on the 27th of November. 262 staff members will benefit from this change, and the position will be kept under review in future financial years. On a technical note, I'm advised that if approved, the payments will be in January pay packets onwards. And again, just to reiterate, this motion doesn't set any precedent for future years as written. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor McDade.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Last year, Perth Kinross Council agreed unanimously to approve the increase of the real living wage in this council chamber in December last year ahead of Christmas, a move welcomed by our staff. And I think it was, to me, a very good way to start the meeting was that we had agreement for the support we wanted to show our staff. And I think it's quite important to remember that the living wage really does make a massive impact on those who are the lowest earners in our society. It ensures that they can afford things like heating and food, you know, at a time of year in particular, as we're coming up to Christmas, when all families are under the crunch, but particularly those low-wage families. So I endorse the motion and hope everyone will support it.
Thank you very much. Are any further comments or contributions? Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Provost. Can I say that I support this motion, and it reflects the work of the UK government in making work pay, which they're doing in 3 ways: by increasing the national living wage so that in a few years' time it will be equal to what we recognise as the living wage. The other ways we're going to be improving people making work pay is by increasing the threshold at which people pay income tax and national insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost.
Oh,
sorry. Sorry, which one did you mean?
Barrett.
All right. Thank you, Provost. You're next, Andrew, maybe.
Did you, Councillor Barrett?
Firstly, can I thank Councillor
Barrett. You had your hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Provost. My question is simply, Councillor Bailey said this is a one-off which could be looked at again. I'd simply ask, if you like, what is the intent of the final sentence to this motion? This position will be kept under review in future financial years, if this is regarded as a one-off motion this year. Thank you.
Karen Donaldson, could you take this one?
Councillor, each year the living wage rate is increased in November, and it's a rate that the council has no influence over or control over. In future years, the intention would be to assess the impact on our pay and grading structure of any increase in the real living wage and determine how it would impact on our pay and grading structure to ensure it didn't compromise the pay differentials that have already been established, and to be able to look at the affordability of that. So my understanding that in saying it will be looked at in future years, we would carry out that detailed assessment if such a motion were to come forward, and we could look at increasing it where there was no compromise on our pay and grading structure and the sums of money involved were affordable.
Thank you, Karen. You happy with that, Councillor Barrett?
Yes, thank you. So in essence, that exactly the same process has been carried out this year.
Should a motion such as that come forward, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost, and it was on that subject that I wanted to propose an amendment to the motion. I'm very grateful to the mover and seconder of the motion before us to accelerate payment of the living wage once again. It does look as though once again there will be all party and all group consensus across the the Chamber to support staff at the bottom of the council pay scale and ensure that they receive a fair day's pay for a hard day's work. It also demonstrates our leadership as a fair employer in our area in Scotland and the UK. The important signal we are sending out is that we are committed to meeting our staff, our employees' actual living costs, and are setting the right example in regard to eradicating in-work poverty. Provost, as I said, I want to put forward a slight amendment to Councillor Bailey's motion, and I hope that they will readily incorporate it into theirs. My amendment is straightforward. It calls for the deletion of the final sentence that we've just discussed and its replacement with the following, and I've provided that text to committee officers. So the text that I would wish to add is, for future years, the Council agrees to implement the real living wage as soon as possible after its announcement and effective from the date of announcement by the Living Wage Foundation, and that this earlier implementation date is built into the Council's annual revenue budget setting process. Provost, I believe it is better to address this issue as a matter of policy. I think the risks of compromising the Council's wage and pay scales are minimal, and I also think that they would be of a very short duration. As I said, this proposal seems to have the unanimous support from all parties and groups, and rather than rely on an annual review of the matter and a one-sided debate in this chamber, I think we should deal with this as a matter of policy. Thank you.
I'm slightly confused, Councillor, because I asked for comments and contributions. Is that an amendment?
Yes, Provost. Yeah.
Right. I was looking for comments and contributions, but I think...
Perhaps if you'd asked for amendments, Provost, I would have done that earlier.
Did you?
You didn't ask. You didn't ask.
Right. Okay. Have you got a seconder for that?
Yes.
Councillor Wilson?
Okay. Thanks, Provost. I'm very happy to second the amendment. I hope it will be accepted. We should just, in the words of one recent politician, get on with this. We should really get on with this, because it would be a much more efficient way of dealing with it. It would save having a motion coming to council. We're delegating this to the officers, which is what we do about salary payments and normal increases, routine increases in wages. I take the point that Karen has made about that, but that's something we manage anyway as part of the process of being an employer, and therefore we should just, I think, amend the motion, which is commendable, and commend those who brought it forward, and allow the officers to do this as part of the routine in future years. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any comments on this?
Well, it's actually a question that I would be concerned, and Karen could maybe allay these concerns, that depending on how much the rise is in the living wage, if it could actually jump up, we would then disadvantage the band above, and who are in the pay grade, you could actually jump a grade. So I just want clarity that that can't happen.
Karen, can you...
Normally, the Council would ensure that no member of staff earned less than the living wage on the 1st of April, which is also the date when, for the implementation of nationally agreed pay awards. So by aligning the implementation of the living wage with the pay awards, ensures that everybody moves up the pay scales at the same time. Should we apply the living wage rate with effect from November, between the period November and the end of March, or it could be longer than that if there are delays in the agreement of the pay award, then we could see an erosion of, or we would see an erosion of pay differentials for a longer period between those earning the living wage and those on the next points up. In the short term, that's not a major issue, but we have seen a compression of our pay scales through the implementation of the living wage, which effectively have continuously moved up the bottom point in our salary scales. So to have a policy position of applying the living wage from November could, through time, actually cause problems in our pay and grading structure.
Thank you, that's what I was afraid of.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey and Councillor Lyle, do you want to say something? Yeah?
Thank you very much, Provost. Just, I'm happy to accept the motion that's been tabled by Councillor Bailey and Councillor McDade. I'm slightly concerned, I have to say, about the amendment in that, given the short notice that we have, that this amendment hasn't been fully evaluated, and we live in a world of unintended consequences, and I'm aware that there is a potential for a compression of salaries going forward, and I think it would be inappropriate of this council to make or to agree the amendment without it being fully evaluated.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Can you just give us 1 second?
It's a national pay board. Do you want to say it?
I think if it would be helpful to clarify to councillors that it is a national pay award, so we would have to pay it anyway. We just need to sort out the structure and any impact and manage any impact. But Karen can confirm that it's not a case that we wouldn't pay it.
The living wage would always be paid from the 1st of April following the announcement of any uplift. That's part of the pay deals that have been set nationally for a number of years for all local authorities. So it would certainly be paid with effect from the 1st of April. The issue here today is whether it would be paid in isolation ahead of any agreement on the pay deal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bailey, Councillor McDade, are you happy to accept what you've heard, or are we going to go to a vote?
Thank you, Provost. What I would like to do is I commend the ambition shown by Councillors Barrett and Councillor Wilson. Sorry. However, I do not wish to incorporate that into the amendment, just because into the motion, just because I believe that there's an opportunity here to make a small change that has already been fully vetted and is possible, and then we can revisit the longer term change at the right time, and I believe that right time is probably the budget setting cycle that we're entering into as of this week effectively. So I would like to defer the bigger change and stick with my motion as proposed at the beginning. Thank you, Provost.
Right, I think the best thing to do is we'll just go to the vote. Okay? You wanted to say something before we
point of order, Provost. I put my hand up for a question prior to the amendment coming forward, and I haven't been taken for that question yet.
I'll
You
carry
seem
on
to be
now
doing
then.
things completely out of order here, because Councillor Barrett put forward an amendment prior to us all being able to question the motion in the first place.
Right, would you like to put your question now?
Oh, certainly. Yes, I can do.
No. This is a bit of a mess, this one. I wasn't expecting this. Is it not right?
You're not supposed to take questions at a motion. It's
Okay,
supposed to be
right.
debate and vote.
I think we'll just go to the vote. That's what we'll do.
No, you need to take his questions. You've started taking questions. Yeah, you have to take his question now.
You're going to get your question after all. Take your question.
Thank you very much, Provost. I would like to explain that obviously this group of staff are in work poverty and actually receive benefits like universal credit. And when we change their salary, that's a change in these staff members' circumstances. They need to tell HMRC about these changing circumstances, because that actually may change their payments under the universal credit scheme. How are the council going to support our employees through that process?
Okay, thank you. Right.
I want Karen to answer it.
Karen?
For reasons of confidentiality, we do not have any information at all on which of our employees may actually be in receipt of universal credit. However, we are alert to the possibility that we may have some staff who would benefit from this uplift in receiving an increase, and potentially a backdated increase, which if this were to be paid in January salaries. And as we have done in the past, where there are any such circumstances, we would alert the general staff group to the possibility of an impact on benefits, and to discuss with us how we might actually manage that collaboratively together. So we would be making that offer to ensure that employees were alerted to that situation, to come forward and to discuss how we would manage that. So that's the best we can do in the circumstances, because we do not hold information on whether any of our employees are in receipt of universal credit benefits.
So just to clarify that welfare rights and incremental payments is actually an option for staff who fit into that circumstance should they choose?
We would discuss with the employee who came forward and discuss with the welfare rights team a way of ensuring that there was minimal or zero impact on their benefits.
You happy with that? Fine. Okay. Can we now go to the vote? Agreed?
Thank you, Provost. We're dealing with item 3 on the agenda, a motion by Councillors Bailey and McDade, as set out before you on the agenda. We have an amendment from Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Wilson, which states the following: deletion of the final sentence and its replacement with the following text. For future years, the Council agrees to implement the real living wage as soon as possible after its announcement and effective from the date of announcement by the Living Wage Foundation, and that this earlier implementation date is built into the Council's annual revenue budget setting process. Can I remind councillors that voting will be by roll call, so when I call out your name, can you indicate whether you're voting for the motion or the amendment? Councillor Ahern.
Motion.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Motion.
Councillor Barnacle.
Motion.
Councillor Barrett.
Amendment.
Councillor Braun.
Motion.
Councillor Audrey Coates.
Motion.
Councillor Harry Coates.
Motion.
Councillor Donaldson.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Forbes. Motion. Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor James. Motion. Councillor Jarvis. Motion. Councillor Lane.
Motion.
Councillor Lyle.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor McDade.
Motion.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Provost.
Motion.
Councillor Parrott. Motion. Councillor Pover.
Motion.
Councillor Purvis.
Motion.
Councillor Rebeck.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson. Councillor Sarwar. Councillor Shires. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Waters.
Motion.
Councillor Williamson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Provost, I have 31 votes for the motion and 4 votes for the amendment, so the motion is carried.
Thank you very much, Scott. I will move on to item 4 on the agenda. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting of the Council of the 25th of September? And can we agree the minute of the special meeting of the Council on the 22nd of October? Item 5, the minutes of the meetings of committees from the 11th of September to 27th of November 2019. Can we agree to note the minutes of the Common Good Fund committees of the 25th of September? Strategic Policy and Resources Committee, 11th September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Local Review Body, 17th of September.
Move for noting, Provost. Happy to second, Provost.
Audit Committee, 18th of September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second.
Scrutiny Committee, 18th of September.
Move for noting, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. Planning and Development Management Committee, 24th of September.
Move for noting.
Happy to second, Provost.
Licensing Committee, 3rd of October.
Move for noting, Provost. Happy to second, Provost.
Local Review Body, 15th of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Planning and Development Management Committee, 23rd of October.
Move for noting, Provost. Seconded, Provost.
Housing and Communities Committee, 30th of October.
For noting, Provost. Happy to second, Provost.
Environment and Infrastructure Committee, 30th of October.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Lifelong Learning Committee, 6th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Local Review Body, 12th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Licensing Committee, 14th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Planning and Development Management Committee, 20th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Audit Committee, 20th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Strategic Policy and Resources Committee, 27th of November.
For noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Scrutiny Committee, 27th of November.
Move for noting, Provost.
Happy to second, Provost.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillors. Item 6, Review of Perth City Plan. Can I invite John Bullough, Chair of the Perth City Development Board, to make his presentation to members? Mr. Bullough, you would have 10 minutes presentation. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Provost, Councillors, it's a great pleasure this morning to give you a presentation on the headlines and the outline themes of the newest edition of the Perth City Plan PCP3. There's lots of data and interesting information for me to go through, so please excuse me if I move quite quickly. Before I do that, however, I wanted to provide you with some background and context to the Perth City Plan and to the Perth City and Development Board. I know most of you realise that the board and the plan exist, but some of you may be slightly fuzzier on the detail. The Perth City Development Board, or the PCDB, is an independent group tasked with setting out the vision for the future of Perth and championing good growth. We've got no executive power, nor do we have the resources to implement the plan. That's the job of Perth and Kinross Council, supported by the Scottish Government and other public sector partners. The PCDB is a private sector-led partnership combining private, corporate and third sector leaders with council officers and elected representatives to build a bold 20-year vision for the future of the city. Since the board was formed in 2013, there have been 2 published editions of the Perth City Plan, and the incumbent plan, PCP2, calls on Perth to be bolder and to aim higher than ever before. It's organised around the primary themes of economic development and placemaking, and sets out our dream to become one of Europe's great small cities. This plan is in the public domain. I haven't got time to go through the themes here. But the plan was adopted by full council in 2015, and in 2016, the largest capital budget in council history was approved by you and your predecessors to deliver it. And since the board was launched, over £600 million worth of investment has been secured within the Perth City region. And the large number of significant investments in our infrastructure and culture and our public realm are apparent all around the city. All of these projects and their critical themes are firmly rooted within the Perth City Plan. Last year, the board agreed that as it had been 3 years since the last edition of the plan, it was appropriate to conduct a review, both to recognise our successes and our disappointments, but also to reflect on the changing operational environment, politically, socially and economically, asking ourselves, what are the new challenges that must frame our aspirations for Perth? And how do we, as a non-executive board, assist and encourage our council to make the brave decisions necessary to buck the trend of large city and small city decline? And the result of that work is PCP3, an agenda for change, which has been submitted for your consideration. This document in your papers is in final draft and it still has to be approved by the full Perth City Development Board in January. But we are looking for the council for outline approval of the plan. It's identified challenges, priorities and its suggestions around the board's role, remit and governance. Once this has been approved by PCDB, the idea will be come back to Council to decide where the plan sits within the wider development plan or the Perth and Kinross offer, which I believe we're about to hear about in a moment. So first of all, context. PCDB has recently published The Perth Story, a place marketing strategy which celebrates Perth's essential qualities and its core values. It's a valuable tool for attracting inward investment, business, visitors, tourists and new residents to our beautiful city. PCP3 builds on the Perth story and sets a 20-year agenda for good growth. It's important to stress that although this is the plan for Perth City, the benefits will be shared throughout the whole of the wider Perth and Kinross as a source of jobs, as a centre for learning and research, and as a focal point for community life, culture and commerce. The greatest change to our operation and environment is following the great success of the Tay Cities deal. Going forward, the city deal mechanism and regional development opportunities will have an increasingly strong influence on our capital programme. So, the age of the small city. The UN have said that we are living in the age of the city. Most of the focus in the policy debate has thus far focused on the largest urban agglomerations, but there's plenty of evidence from the UK and abroad that small cities can prosper by being attractive and enterprising, different and distinctive, thriving not by retreating into parochialism, but by developing niche roles, unique selling points and specialities, plugging into global networks that drive economic growth, knowledge creation and cultural exchange. In the last edition of the PCP, we highlighted the achievements of Exeter, Karlstad and Umeå in Sweden and Freiburg in Germany. This edition of the plan has followed several other star performers, including Altrincham in Cheshire, an innovative wealth-building model in Preston, as well as benchmarking studies such as the Financial Times annual rankings for small and micro cities, using data on economic growth, human capital, and the quality of life. And those top performers include Galway, Coburg in Germany, Tartu in Estonia, and Nitra in Slovenia. We should aim for Perth to be recognised in the same way within 5 years. We are positive and we are optimistic. Perth has huge assets and opportunities, but we also know, like every other city, Perth faces enormous challenges if it is to become the place that we believe it can be. These challenges are not theoretical. They are real and they are urgent. Perth's future success will depend on how we, or how you, respond to each and every one of them. So, quick move through the challenges. First of all, climate change. We're going to hear about it a bit later on. The evidence of man-made climate change is incontrovertible. Every city is now under pressure to reduce their carbon emissions, decarbonise their heat, and improve their air quality. The key announcement is the UK's commitment for net zero emissions in 2050, Scotland's commitment for it in 2045, and Scotland's ban on all biodegradable landfill in 2025. These are really ambitious targets. If we want to get close to achieving this goal, it is going to require huge investment in infrastructure. Carbon negative technologies, city region district heating, and wide-scale electrification. Change is coming fast. We can either be proactive and take a leadership role, or stay behind the curve and be forced through legislation. There's already a race going on between Edinburgh and Glasgow to become Scotland's first carbon neutral city. Perth's small footprint and high density gives us a really unique potential to make sustainability, clean air, and the protection of our natural assets one of our greatest selling points. We should aspire in Perth to be the UK's, not Scotland's, first zero carbon city. And note, I did not add the word net. Ageing population. Perth and Kinross will increase its population to 160,000 by 2040. Number of people over the age of 65 is increasing massively, while the number of working age adults and children is declining. Implications of an ageing population are significant, especially in our rural communities. That makes Perth's role in attracting and retaining young people and families crucial to maintaining our demographic balance. The future of work, employment in Scotland is at record levels, and it's high in Perth and Kinross, but there is still plenty of evidence of in-work poverty and insecurity. For many people, wages are lower in real terms now than before the financial crash. How we work is changing fast, and more people than ever now are self-employed and working from home. Automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, all of these technologies are moving very quickly. Consultants and PwC are stating that 30% of existing jobs could be at risk by 2030. 30% of our total jobs at risk by 2030, mostly of these low-skilled. Perth must develop its skilled and knowledge-based economies. Changing role of city centres, crisis on our high street is well documented. Retail is no longer a primary driver of footfall into our city centre. If we want people to choose Perth city centre as a place to live, work, shop, learn, or just to meet, we must offer them unique products and experiences. So we are investing heavily in our cultural offering and have a growing reputation for fine food and successful events. We need to continue to build Perth's brand as a unique destination for culture, cuisine, speciality shopping and leisure. Perth is a beautiful city in a memorable setting. We need to be confident we're perfectly placed to reinvent ourselves. Travel and mobility. Considerable evidence exists that demonstrates the UK has reached peak car. There is a sharp decline in the number of young people now holding driving licenses. This is great news as far as air quality is concerned and carbon emissions. But if we want to take this further, we need to provide viable transport alternatives. Rural Perthshire is obviously more dependent than other parts of Scotland for reasons that you will realise. But Perth City is compact and perfectly placed to build the necessary infrastructure to promote active travel as well as sustainable alternatives throughout the whole city region.
1 minute, Mr. Bill.
Ah, right. Within, crikey. Okay, I'll try to speak even faster. Provost, am I able to get another couple of minutes? Because I've still got a little bit to go. Okay.
We have a big agenda, that's the
Okay,
problem.
no problem. 2040, building communities. We need to build 5,000 new homes. I will proceed. We need to build 5,000 new homes. It is not good enough for us to just build lots of cheap homes. We need to build inspiring communities. And it is not good enough for us to consider the lowest common denominator housing product. Digital. Very easy for a small city like Perth to be left behind. However, it is absolutely key that we have the ambition to be one of the best digitally connected cities in Scotland. And social justice, last but not least. Most people in Perth have a good quality of life, but parts of our city are amongst the 10 most deprived areas of Scotland, which none of us are happy with. Okay, grounds for optimism. Hang on a moment.
I think we've just about had our time, Mr. Bill, I'm sorry.
Right. Well, I think that the fact is, if I can round up on that, there's a far more information than I'm even giving you within the Perth City Plan itself. I'd be delighted myself. Mike Robertson is here from the Perth City Development Board. Delighted for us to speak to any councillor personally and talking about it. But there's a really ambitious and exciting future for Perth that I hope you're all going to get behind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillip. Are there any questions on the presentation or report? Councillor Lang.
That was interesting as far as we were able to see it. Would you be prepared to come back just for a special session, not when we're so time pressed, and maybe to invite the councillors to come along who want to come along and go through your full and have more time for questions, to give more time to us?
Utterly delighted, yes.
Thank
utterly
you.
Delighted.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Provost. John, I realise you're a bit sort of hurried towards the end there. Was there anything in particular that you didn't get to cover that you would like to respond to in response to my question?
No, I think you get the gist, and I know Councillor Barrett has been part of the Development Board as well in us formulating our plans. I think that the important issue here is we are at a turning point on so many of these challenges. We are at a very, very critical point. Climate change being one of them, but there are so many other aspects within here which requires leadership and partnership between the public and the private sector. A lot of these developments require very, very serious investment and a strong ambition. That cannot be delivered by the private sector on their own, and cannot be delivered by the public sector. These are only going to be delivered through partnership. And the key focus of the board going forward is to work with the council to create the frameworks that we can invest together.
Thank you. I think we definitely would have to find a date in the diary so we could spend some considerable time, because it's an important subject and we need to rather than hurry through it.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lyle.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thank you, John and Mike, for coming along this morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Perth City Development Board for their work in refreshing the Perth City Plan and securing renewed consensus on our vision and strategic priorities for investment and support for growing together in the longer term. The Perth City Plan focuses more clearly on sustainability and inclusive growth, as well as recognising the wider regional influence from the Tay-Cities deal going forward. Importantly, it also aligns the city plan with the narrative set out in the Perth story. The Council is already very supportive of the work of the City Development Board. The delivery of the city plan will be integral to the Perth Kinross offer, which we'll hear about shortly. However, I must stress that the responsibility for successful delivery goes beyond this council chamber. Business, government agencies, academia, and wider communities must all step up to this challenge, and they must play an important part in delivering the City Board's ambitions. Finally, I would welcome the proposal from the City Board for a smaller and more focused board, and I look forward to working with these colleagues going forward. Thank you, Provost. Happy to move the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Are there any comments on this paper? Any questions? Sorry. Sorry, I'm having a bad day today. We have a seconder, please.
Thank you, Provost. And thank you, John. I'm sorry you were rushed towards the end, and I'm grateful to Councillor Lang for suggesting that we have you back, and I very much look forward to that. And I have a few questions, but I think we'll keep them for that. So hopefully we can arrange that, Provost, as quickly as possible in the new years. But thank you for coming along and presenting this. It's a very interesting and very forward-thinking plan. I do have some concerns about where the money's all going to come from, but I guess we can explore that when you come back. Provost, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Some comments this time. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. Can I say that I hugely welcome this report, and hugely welcome also the opportunity that I think we're heading towards to have a much longer, more in-depth session about its contents. That will be a very valuable session. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. I want to thank John Bullough for his presentation this morning. Provost, I agree with the authors of the Perth City Plan that these are exciting and challenging times for Perth as a city and for our wider area. But I'm really pleased to see that there is a unifying ambition among all the partners to raise our game in pursuing our goal to become one of Europe's great small cities, which means embracing change, countering the naysayers and inspiring hope and ambition across Perth. The challenges are set out succinctly in the report: climate change, as was mentioned, progress towards zero carbon, a growing ageing population and attracting more working age people to our area, upskilling of our local workforce, enlivening our city centre and the nighttime economy to create attractive experiences to draw those younger people to live here, and also building on our major cultural and heritage visitor attractions. And Provost, without any hairs coursing, it is high time that we had a decision on the Stone of Destiny and whether that is going to help drive us forward as a visitor destination and an asset in the renewal of our city centre. Provost, it's really good to see striving for social justice and good growth at the heart of the plan, and that reflects the work of the Fairness Commission and our renewed focus on tackling child poverty. Provost, the Perth City Development Board's pledges are key and are welcome, and I get a real sense of mobilisation among partners working in concert with active ambassadors, forming a Team Perth that will be both vocal and practical in achieving the plan's goals. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to comment? Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Provost. I was going to phrase this as a question, but we didn't really have much time for questions, so I will try and phrase it as a comment. It's just something that I've mentioned in this chamber before. While we're all obviously supportive of measures to tackle climate change and the climate emergency, we do have to take special cognizance of the fact that Perth and Kinross is a rural area. And people are reliant on their cars to get about, and particularly in light of the announcement today by Stagecoach of significant reductions in bus services and public transport across Perth and Kinross. I do think that 25% reduction in car use and shift to public transport and active travel by 2025 is very, very ambitious. And without significant public subsidy or some other option, and we may have to look at whether that is realistic, because we do want to make sure that if we're going to transform Perth City and have all these exciting other opportunities, that people in our rural parts, which is a significant proportion of Perth and Kinross, can actually get to Perth.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purvis. Is there any other contributions? Okay, then we'll move on now. I think we'll definitely come back to you, Mr. Brullo, very soon. Thank you. Items 7 and 8, Deputy Provost will now take these items.
Thank you, Provost. I think the next paper follows on nicely from what we'll be hearing about the Perth City Plan. We'll now hear about the Perth. Thank you, Deputy Provost. Elected members will be aware that the principles of the Perth and Kinross offer were introduced earlier this year. Its purpose is to reshape the relationship between ourselves and our communities, whether they're our residents, our partners, our businesses, our employees, or any of our other stakeholders, changing it from one of the council as the provider of services to one where we work together to agree joint priorities and establish what the future of our area will look like. This will also mean aligning our resources to ensure improved outcomes for all. Clearly, this is a long-term ambition, but we are building on very firm foundations. There are many examples of the offer in practice from all services. Just a few of those include our very successful Bloom groups, the work we do with communities when building new play parks, the joint work with At Scott Street Property Services and a local contractor to deliver community benefits, the holiday hunger work undertaken with 12 partner agencies, our joint work with Letham Hub to improve inequalities, social isolation and health provision in the area, the Big January get-together, our ongoing work with Fun Young Individuals, supporting families affected by the criminal justice system, and we will be continuing and developing new areas of work such with other major employers such as Aviva to develop and promote our staff volunteering opportunities. The report outlines the work undertaken to date, including the 1,000 participants over 40 engagement events. External consultation includes NHS Tayside, the Perth City Ambassadors, Aviva, the Community Planning Partnership, Ganachie Trust, PCAFs and many others.
and this has been very well received with a lot of interest for all to get involved. And that's exactly the same message that we're getting internally, both from yourselves and from all our employees. We've also timetabled an offer discussion with all local area partnerships for next year, and this will include community councils as well. This work is building on the foundations for the way ahead, and the report identifies 5 key areas for 2020, which are the vision, brand and framework for the offer, the communications and engagement plan, developing the employee experience, promoting quick wins and successes, some of which I've already outlined, and developing the digital engagement platform. And we will bring a further report forward in spring next year outlining the communications and engagement plan and the framework for the offer. And we're happy, obviously, to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Are there any questions on this report? I do hope there are some. Either that or Barbara's put it so well that everybody understands and quite happy with the Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and thank you to the Executive Director for her outline of the offer. And I think it's very helpful that we're seeing this year at this point in time as well. My question is, and I confess I have a wider knowledge of this because I've been one of the elected members on the steering group, so my question is more to help other elected members perhaps in the room as we explore this. In terms of the offer, obviously we've previously discussed that this is going to be about transforming the way the council works, and I think what's fundamental about the offer is it's about co-creation and how we're going to work with our communities. So we've obviously had a discussion in the steering group around that this is a first step, and I think that is quite important to emphasise that this is a first step and that this will not be completed in a year or 2 years, but it is an ongoing transformation project that will hopefully outlast probably everyone in the room in terms of the way the council works. And I was wondering if the Executive Director might be able to elaborate a bit further in terms of how that might play out in terms of communications with our communities in the long term.
Thank you.
I think there's been quite a long and lengthy discussion in many of the arenas that we've been taking it to, that we just need to be very careful that when we're developing this, that we're not being very prescriptive, in the approaches that we're taking. So, what might suit one community might not necessarily suit another community, but we're very focused on, first steps being about listening. And what we're looking at the moment are 4 key questions, 4 or 5 or 3 questions, where we would be going out, and every consultation, event that we organise will be asking all of our communities exactly those same questions. And that will help us form a very, very clear picture of what across Perth and Kinross people are looking for from the offer. And I think that it's important with that we, we use, the consultation methods that we already have and the groups that we already have. But as part of what we're currently calling the big conversation, we also need to be able to, meet and, discuss the offer and ask those same questions of people who are, more frightened or, not as aware of what the council do, and, are not often engaged in those processes. And that includes, our populations across, areas such as Latham, but also our rural communities and also the communities of interest, such as those with additional support needs as well.
Want to ask a further question, Councillor McDade?
If I may just follow up
slightly supplementary.
Just slight supplementary. Some of the, I know that officers have been down to meet with counterparts in Wigan, which has obviously had the Wigan deal and has been quite a successful project that they've embarked on in terms of transformation. They're about, I think, 7 or 8 years into that. And I was just wondering if in terms of the communications, whether we've taken on board some lessons learned that they've found.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have learned a number of lessons from Wigan, the first one being to include our partners early in consultation and to actually be proactive in how we consult. So using the existing communication methods that we've got, but also starting to think about new ways. So going to where people are, so we know people use community centres, we know people use supermarkets, so we are planning a range of different ways of getting out to people who are not always consulted with or heard.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I thought that tackling child poverty was going to be a central plank of the big conversation, but it doesn't seem to get any sort of mention in this report. So has that changed? Certainly when we met with the Minister earlier this year, that was a vital strand in the way that we were going to take forward this, and I would like some reassurance that that's still the case.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I can provide assurance to all elected members that child poverty is front and central to the Perth and Kinross offer, as are a number of areas that are detailed in the programme for government and indeed in the National Performance Framework.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This week, the World Economic Forum issued the latest statistics on gender equality or inequality, and in the UK we've fallen 6 places from 15th down to 21st. I think I would like some assurance that as part of the Perth offer we look at gender inequality across Perth and Kinross, and in fact, Councillor Barrett, this probably would go somewhat towards child poverty, because very often the genesis of child poverty is gender inequality in the first place, and that when we look at our equalities criteria across the board in terms of developing the Perth offer, that we look very carefully at gender inequality and consider that as a key plank of our offer going forward, or to at least reduce it.
I think the Chief Executive or Barbara, they're deciding who's going.
So we're just having, sort of tic-tac there. Sort of absolutely, sort of equalities and inequalities essential to the Perth and Kinross offer. And as the report identifies, sort of what we've got within, sort of the head of innovation role is a number of, sort of different bits of the, sort of the organisation, which includes equalities, sort of to make sure that those messages are being, sort of put into the offer as we go forward.
Thank you.
Just for clarity, it's not just for Perth Council, but it's for all of our citizens across the council.
Yes.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I invite Councillor Lyle to move the report.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. The Perth and Kinross offer is an exciting new approach to co-creating a sustainable model for public service in Scotland. In collaboration, we will do this in Perth and Kinross with staff, citizens, communities, partners and stakeholders. In future, we will change our traditional relationships of provider and consumer to one of shared partners, means harnessing the strength and experiencing which will include our local communities. This will lead to improved outcomes where people will receive the appropriate services they require at the right time. Good progress has been made with the Perth and Kinross offer over the past 6 months, and hopefully this paper will set out clarity for the work for the year ahead, and it highlights the 5 key priorities for taking this work forward. Thank you. Happy to move the paper.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I welcome this report and happy to formally second it.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, I welcome this report, and I'd been saving my comments on it. In terms of the work that the steering group has helped guide so far, it is incredibly exciting, the opportunities that this whole project presents in terms of reforming the way that we work with our communities, and I think that as the project progresses and the transformation starts to become apparent to our communities, the way we work with them will be embraced and welcomed. I think we do have a challenge to overcome in some of our communities where they're perhaps jaded about previous engagement with public sector bodies, and this is our opportunity to confound those expectations and to really show them that alternatives forms of engagement are possible with public sector bodies. And it's very much about co-creation and co-design and not having communities feel as though we are doing something to them, but that we are working with them on the solutions and understanding that each of our communities are unique and different and have different challenges and different desires for their communities. So I welcome this report, I welcome the update. I think that we have a long way to go, and I think no one is pretending we don't, but this is very much a starting point in a long, long journey, and I'd like to commend officers and thank them for bringing forward the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. If I can be parochial just for a minute, and I always apologise in advance for that, but Barbara did mention the Letham Wellbeing Hub, and I think it's a great example of how community and local authorities can work together in the context of the Perth offer. We're only a short way down the road, but I know that the community does appreciate the efforts thus far. The organic growth in the services and the things that we're delivering from the building in Tweedsmuir Road is fantastic, but it's only sustainable if with redesign of the building, and I just urge the Council continue to support the community in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Very supportive of the principles of the Perth and Kinross offer and the plan that's set out. I do think this is a very encouraging project going forward, which will change the way in which we engage with our communities. I would, however, like to focus on one particular point which I have raised before here in this chamber, and it has been mentioned briefly in the report, but that's about the efficient delivery of public services and ensuring that we use our resources to maximum impact. If we look at Wigan, which is the example that has been raised a number of times, for every £2 that they were spending in communities, they were able to save £1 from their budget. And in addition, they were the only council, I think, not just in England, but in the whole of the UK, to be able to not only freeze, but actually cut their council tax last year. And that's something that I think that we shouldn't just be doing this as an exercise to try and tackle financial problems that we might have now, but actually to deliver more efficiently for the people who put us here, the taxpayers who pay for every single person in this room. And I hope that that's a principle when we come to agree the framework in spring 2020 that everyone can agree to. Obviously, it's a principle that the Conservative Party hold dear in terms of low taxation, but the SNP did for 12 years freeze council tax in government and clearly recognise the importance of ensuring that people, council tax, which is a regressive tax, are able to have that frozen or indeed cut to help their pay packets. And indeed, just on a final point, Wigan was a Labour-run council, so an entirely different, although it now partially is represented by a Conservative MP as of last Thursday, but that should show that we can go across the political spectrum in terms of ensuring that we keep taxation lowest as possible.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I welcome this report hugely, and I note the first priority is building our Perth and Kinross offer vision. I'm aware that the Chief Executive has spoken previously about an overarching or a single plan, and I hope that within that vision there's the room for creating the linkage with such things as the Perth City Plan and the Climate Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. This report has to be welcomed. It is the only way we can move forward to provide services across the local authority. This is a vital way. If we do not stick to this plan and widen it out, we will not be able to provide the services we provide at the moment because it's not going to be viable. So that's about the report. Secondly, could I ask the Provost to give the Chief Executive, who I always welcome her interventions and that, to have dispensation, not to have to stand up to speak every time, because she's obviously in some physical discomfort. So if she can just stay seated when she answers.
Thank you very much for these comments and your concern for the Chief Executive. I'm sure she appreciates it. Are there any further comments on this report? Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for your very positive comments, and thanks to the officers for bringing this report to us. Okay. We now move on to paper 8, which has been mentioned in the last 2 reports, Climate Emergency Report and Action Plan. I'd like to invite Jim Valentine, Deputy Chief Executive, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillors, the consequences of climate change present significant risks to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security and economic growth across all countries. We only have a limited period left to take the decisive action required to avert this crisis and avoid the worst impacts. In June 2019, Perth Kinross Council passed a motion committing the Council to lead by example in accelerating the transformational change required to address the climate emergency, which had been declared by both the UK and Scottish Parliaments earlier this year. The Chief Executive was requested to set out a route map to deliver a low-carbon Perth Kinross through co-production with citizens and other stakeholders. This interim report and action plan sets out our initial route map to meeting the ambitions of the Council, as well as highlighting the targets, challenges and the action the Council has already taken to address climate change. It is deliberately an interim document, as it forms the basis to develop our engagement with partners and communities, giving an opportunity for the Council, partners and all citizens to play a part in designing and delivering a low-carbon and climate-resilient Perth Kinross. I think Councillor Provost set out well earlier some of the challenges we face, but there will be also opportunities which will arise. With our ambition to reduce carbon emissions to net zero, we recognise the need for the public, as citizens and consumers, to have a much larger role in shaping our collective future actions. This is consistent with the emerging work on the Perth Kinross offer, where the Council co-produces solutions with communities and stakeholders to support everyone in the area to live life well. Myself and the team are happy to answer any questions which you might have.
Thank you very much. Questions? We have Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Could you explain what is meant by the Climate Change Commission that you're talking about establishing? What will that actually do, and how will it operate, and who will be on it?
I think I'll start off, Councillor Robertson, and I might bring Keith McNamara in. But I think the plan was, in the same way as we did with the Fairness Commission, to bring in as broad a stakeholder group as possible to be able to influence and inform the work that we're doing. So I think that's our ambition. Don't know if Keith wants to add anything else.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, this is something which several local authorities have undertaken. I think one of the leading lights in terms of climate change is Bristol City Council. They have a Climate Change Commission, which is, I think, 18 members. It's public sector organisations, private sector organisations, community representation and also interest groups in climate change, is to have that joint co-production and identification of targets and what we can all do. The report before you is quite explicit in terms of the Council's carbon footprint is relatively small compared to the totality of the carbon emissions in Perth and Kinross, so it needs everybody to be involved. And I think a key part of a commission would be to challenge each other around what we can do to do more. So there are several examples of templates that we can actually use which have been successfully implemented by other councils.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Deputy Provost, I've got several questions. Do you want me to split them over on different parts of the report? So would you
yes,
prefer?
that might be helpful.
I'll do one part first. Yeah. The first question really is to do with the EV chargers for cars. We're talking about 80 or so at the moment. If you pardon the pun, are we in a position to speed those up, the installations? We obviously, it's inspiring confidence in people to change their vehicles if they know they're not going to run out of fuel. And the other part of my question is, it's not just our residents we should be thinking about. We obviously want tourists to come up and visit Scotland still. They too will be changing to electric vehicles. And should we be trying to encourage hotels, guest houses, self-catering cottages to actually install these in a similar vein to years ago when they offered free Wi-Fi to people?
I'm happy to pick up on that one. I think in terms of the EV charging, we have a network across the council area. That network has been supported by the governments as they rolled it out. I think as we go forward, we need to be sure that we are aligning to what the government's own programme is going to be. We have examples in the rural areas of hotels, etc., who have their own EV points. So I think that anything that we're doing in terms of EV charging will be linked to what the government wants to do and linking into what the funding opportunities that there are.
Do you wish to, have you another question you wish to ask?
The only other question I was going to ask on this point was, as a stopgap, and that's out with our remit, I know, but should we be pushing perhaps for a reduction in speed limits to reduce petrol consumption and thereby lower emissions, albeit in the short term?
I think there's a variety of what might be seen as controversial policies in terms of speed limits, parking enforcement, etc., which all has to be considered in terms of demand management.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I have a couple of questions here regarding local development plan. What scope do we have within our current development plan regarding climate change? And the second question is, does this council have any ability to make additional changes throughout the life of the local development plan regarding climate change?
Thank you. I think Peter Marshall's going to answer this question.
Deputy Provost. The development plan cannot be changed under current legislation until it has a complete review. That position is going to change with as we see the implementation of the new Planning Act, but we haven't seen the details of that, and we presume that it will only apply from the first plan developed under the new Act. So at the moment we can't change. However, we do have supplementary guidance which is linked to the policies on low carbon, and that can be changed, but only within the parameters of the policy. So we can add further guidance, we can refine them, but we can't change the thrust of the policy. However, going to the original part of your question, what provision does the plan make? This is not a new agenda. It's probably come up the public awareness agenda, but it's been something that's been addressed through our LDP1 and our LDP2, both in the strategy within the plan to locate most of the development where the greatest services are to reduce the need to travel, and secondly through policies which have enhanced and go beyond the building regulations requiring energy efficiency with homes and buildings and the use of renewable energy power within the buildings. We also have policies which allow for the provision of renewable energy generation within the plan. So there are a number of areas where the plan has already tackled the climate change agenda, and no doubt it will be higher up the agenda for the next version of the plan.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Changing behaviours often results in a carrot and stick approach, and I'm sure going forward we'll see the Scottish Government and other agencies bringing forward these things. But one other important thing is actually quality information for both the public and for businesses. And it's good to see the report that our partnership working with SCARF and the HEAT project actually provides this positive information and information that can be relied upon.
And the question I have around that is that there are charlatans and profiteers out there. And I know at the moment through social media and contact with my own constituents that they do get contacted, they do get door knocked by people trying to take advantage of the climate emergency to refit boilers and say that there's money for this and there's money for that, and that's not there. So how do we meet this challenge of ensuring that our residents and businesses get the right information from the right people so that they aren't ripped off?
Thank you for your... Keith, sorry.
Thanks, Deputy Provost, and thank you. It's a very relevant question, Councillor McEwen. This is a national issue. This has been raised through COSLA, so we are well aware of that. Our Trading Standards Service obviously looks to prevent the charlatans you talk about in any way, shape or form. As you've probably noted from the report, one of the things is we want to be sharing considerable information around climate change through a dedicated website which we can share with our partners in our community. So that would be one form of messaging, but I think we can use all our council channels through our Trading Standards Service, through the other services which engage with people to be getting the message out about using bona fide advisors. As you say, they are out there and we promote them, but it's a very live issue for us and we appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deborah Provost. I have two questions, but the first one is quite quick, so I can put them together if that helps. I'm looking at figure 8 on page 11 of the appendix, and it shows how we are higher per person than the Scottish average. Just wondered if there was a comparator area that we need to look at that's rural like we are, and how that might affect us going forward. And then my other question is about the local heat and energy efficient strategy, and I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more, and especially about the funding that might be needed and if sources have been identified.
Peter Marshall's going to answer this one.
Deputy Provost, the situation with Perth and Kinross is our per capita emissions are higher than the average, and that is typical of what we see across rural areas nationally. I don't have to hand comparative figures for other rural authorities, but we can certainly find them and provide them for you. The second question, the local heat and energy efficiency strategies. We are in the process of working with the Scottish Government as one of the pilot projects, and also working with a number of other authorities quite closely, directly, Highlands and Fife in particular, on what the new heat and energy efficiency strategies will look like. And the original pilot projects concentrated on heat rather than the general energy consumption that is required within an area. And what we found was that energy consumption and the sources of the energy was in some areas even more important to the businesses and people than the insulation factors of buildings. So we're looking at a new format for that. I've been involved in discussions with COSLA and the Scottish Government on how this is going to be rolled out. And it's been clearly made, the point's been clearly made to COSLA that this is a significant additional resource implications for authorities all across Scotland. And the government would appear to have recognised this, but we don't have any indication of the exact requirements for implementation of this, nor the resources that will follow that. And one of the key things that we don't know yet is whether we will be asked to produce local heat and energy efficiency strategies, a programme of them, or we will be asked to produce one by a certain target date for all of Perth and Kinross. And that would have significant different resource implications. We do know that the one pilot we did complete, we had £100,000 in grant aid for that, but we probably had another £100,000 in staff resource going into that. Now, it's not to suggest that that would be replicated all across Perth and Kinross, because it only dealt with about 4% of our population. It was a pilot. We've learnt from that. As we move forward, there will be efficiencies to be gained, but it will be an expensive process, which I don't think Scottish local authorities will be able to support without additional resource.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Provost. I just, one of the key aspects of this paper or dealing with climate change is measuring our progress and how we measure that. I'd just like to understand and ask how dependent are we on outside bodies for measuring that progress, and how much of that is done in-house or we're commissioning to do, and just want to ask about any challenges that we face in measuring that and ensuring that we do get an accurate picture of our progress with this. Thank you.
Deputy Provost, I think what you raise is a complete nightmare. That there are various sources of information out there which help us, but actually comprehensive information down to a very localised level is very difficult to obtain. What I think we're also seeing is people are using different measures to justify that they are getting to the net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And we need, I think, more guidance nationally to get some consistency there across the country so that we can measure our progress. What we are good at is knowing our own emissions within the council. But as the report points out, that is less than 3% of the total emissions within Perth and Kinross. So it is a really challenging area, and one which, again, has been discussed with COSLA and the Scottish Government, the need to get more support to collate information.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett, yes, I do have your name, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks very much, Deputy Provost. I was very pleased to see the actions on page 33 and 34 of the report to increase recycling of plastics as a carbon-intensive form of waste through additional collections and the deposit return scheme. There's also welcome mention of reduction in the use of single-use items on council premises and the analysis of the scale of the problem. However, I am concerned that action W1 in Appendix 2 on page 63 is marked red with an asterisk, meaning there's no resource to take forward action beyond the analysis and to cut our use of intensive carbon single-use plastics. And I'd be keen to know what level of resource is required to implement the necessary actions to address that. And if we can't have that today, then certainly it needs to be something that's provided through the budget setting process so that we can allocate resource to tackle that in the future.
Keith's going to try and answer this question.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. The report mentions that we're doing a couple of actions around that at the moment, work in progress. One is a survey of colleagues within the council to identify what single-use products we actually have, and the second is an analysis through procurement of the single-use products that we actually purchase within the organisation. Sheila Best and the Waste team has been leading on this work. So this is currently work in progress, and I think Sheila's bringing a report to our senior management team early in the new year. So we're not in a position to answer Councillor Barrett's question just now, but we would like to do so in the very near future, in the early new year.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is around the land use section. And obviously after transport, land use is the next highest for emissions in Scotland in terms of the estimates. Obviously as a rural, and in some cases a very extremely rural area, Perth and Kinross, we have perhaps less opportunity to reduce some of the transport emissions that other more built-up councils have. However, due to our geography, the flip side of that is we have huge potential to reduce our emissions through land use. Now, I'm very welcoming of the talk of peatland restoration and other similar projects in terms of increasing woodland, etc. However, what I'm looking for is reassurance that the Climate Commission membership, which was mentioned earlier by, I think, Councillor Robertson, will have representation from rural and extreme rural communities and representation from those who are working on the land as well, because it's absolutely vital that we have the buy-in from everyone if we're to actually make a success of this. So I just want reassurance around that.
thank you, Councillor McDade. Yes, it's really important that we have people that can deal with forestry, that can deal with peatlands, etc., and that commission is wholly inclusive of all the issues.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Obviously, if we're going to effect climate change, lots of people are going to have to make lots of very small changes to their way of living. And one of the changes I'd like to see within this council is see more councillors use their tablets rather than bring large amounts of paper to meetings. And I wonder if any of the officers could do some investigation into councillors' concerns about using paper. Perhaps it's lack of power in this room, or perhaps spare copies. I wonder if that can be investigated. Thank you.
Noted. I hope you're impressed. Councillor Donaldson.
Clearly, this is an interim report, and going forward, what's going to be absolutely vital is measurement, is monitoring, is verification. But can I turn to section 11? I'm going to have one supplementary, but working together to tackle climate change. Can I ask to what degree there have been discussions on this with adjoining local authorities, and I'm thinking in particular of Angus and Dundee City?
Peter Marshall is going to answer this.
So, Deputy Provost, we work quite closely with Fife, Dundee as well, and Highland, which has been very useful because of the rural nature of Highland, on a range of issues. And there's also been liaison through Scottish Cities Alliance, and a low-carbon working group was being set up with that. Unfortunately, it's been a little in abeyance, but we're expecting it to be resurrected again. There are also arrangements through the Scottish Government, which have put up a working group on the local heat and energy efficiency strategies, which helps us get together and share ideas through a range of topic areas, and not just the local heat and energy efficiency strategies. So it is an area we're dependent on liaising with other authorities, getting their ideas, sharing our good practice, because for a lot of us it is a new area, and it can be enhanced, but these mechanisms are in place already.
Can I just, as a supplementary follow-up, clearly I mentioned Angus and Dundee in particular because we do share a number of services with them. And there's one common aspect with Dundee and with Angus as well, and it's not something over which we have direct control, but we do have, if we work together, have immense influence, and that is Tayside Pension Fund. And that is a value at end March of 3.9 billion. It's almost certainly well over 4 billion now. And has consideration been given to the investment process adopted by Tayside Pension Fund? I'm not talking about ethical investment, I'm talking what is becoming mainstream now in the investment industry, and that's ESG investment, environmental, social and governance investment. That is pursued by a large number of the main players, and it is not necessarily at the expense, it may even be to the benefit of sustainable long-term investment returns. I think given the size, the clout of that pension fund, it is something we have to look at.
Thank you. I think Stuart Mackenzie is going to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson, for your question. The investment policy decisions of the Tayside Pension Fund are delegated to a committee of elected members of Dundee City Council. But what I can do is convey the concerns of this chamber to my colleagues in Dundee City for consideration in setting that policy moving forward.
Can I thank you for that? Because I do think it is at present too much under the aegis of Dundee City, and it should be all three local authorities that feed in.
Thank you. I have three more people wishing to ask questions. The next one is Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question refers to, on page 268 to paragraph 3.5, part 3. I'm heartened to note that people are catching on to the fact there really is a climate emergency, and I wonder if we might ask Mr Valentine if he could bring forward the time there rather than after the summer recess. I think urgency is an issue here, and I think I have no wish to work Jim to death, but I think if we could possibly get a report sooner than after the summer recess, it doesn't send out the right message of urgency. I don't think we have to wait that long, if that is possible.
Deputy Chief Executive, can you clarify?
I think, Councillor Simpson, I recognise the urgency attached to this, but I think it is a resource and an evidence gathering period. So I think it would be difficult to accelerate that. We'll try and do it as quickly as we can, but I don't think we can commit to anything that's too early.
Thank you. Councillor Barnacle.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. Page 36 of the plan talks about forestry, and it talks about planting, which is good. But one area it doesn't mention is tree protection. We live in big tree country. I have a number of examples of some elements of the development sector removing good quality trees despite efforts to preserve them. And it seems to me that we can only protect individual trees through TPOs. So I've raised this before in terms of the woodland strategy. Can we not strengthen our tree protection, particularly for groups of older woodland? Because it seems to me that we don't have a strong enough protection. That is my question.
Peter Marshall, please.
There are already policies in place which should allow us to ensure that there is what we call compensatory planting where trees are removed. And it is a policy which is implemented quite widely. We perhaps need to examine it with more detail for each application. But one of the facts I learned in the process of writing this report is that trees beyond 50-year life absorb less carbon than those which are growing. So if we're talking about this from a carbon reduction point of view, having healthy juvenile plantations growing may be to greater advantage. Now, I must admit that I'm not an expert on this, but it was something which surprised me recently.
Okay, Councillor Laying, and then Councillor Braun will get his second question, as long as it's very short.
Thanks. This is quite a short one. I was just looking at the engagement and community groups partners. I was just wondering if we could ensure that most of the schools and secondary schools and even primary schools in Perth Kinross have either environmental or climate change groups, and I would like to be that certainly the youth, and through that method, should be represented. So I'd like to ask if we can ensure that they're involved in this engagement partner.
Okay. I think it's a nod. That will be the case. Okay, Councillor Braun, final question.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you for letting me come back. It is Christmas after all.
Yeah, absolutely.
My question relates to page 300 of our report, or page 26 of the actual report itself. It's to do with the energy performance certificates on owner-occupied homes. I'm just querying, in my area, which is very much rural, many homes which would need this work done are either owned by pensioners or will be owned by pensioners in due course. Will be supplementing their pension. So I'm just wondering, to have this work done, do we plan to have some sort of funding in place to assist them? And the second part of the question is, to do the work, will we be issuing some form of exemption certificate? Because without that properties could become unsaleable and unmortgageable I know it's a bit further ahead, but these things I think should be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Thank you, Councillor Braun. I think it's a really good point that you highlight, and it's not just in relation to the EPCs. These are very challenging targets that will require a significant amount of resource. And I don't think all the dots have been joined up in terms of that journey that we have to go on. So I think what you've got there is you've got targets, and we really need to work through how we arrive and how we resolve the issues around these targets.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. This interim climate emergency report and action plan puts forward the initial proposals for fulfilling the ambitions that were set out in the motion agreed unanimously by this Council in June this year. This comprehensive report builds on the substantial work the Council and its partners have already undertaken to address climate challenge. However, we recognise the need for urgent action, and this report sets out the interim measures we are taking as a basis for a much wider engagement with our communities and partners on shared climate change visions and actions programmes going forward. Realistically, following Councillor Waters' question earlier, the report identifies that only 3% of carbon emissions in Perth and Kinross are attributable to this Council. Therefore, the paper highlights the significant role that all our partners and communities will need to play in challenging the other 97% if we are to be successful in reaching carbon zero in Perth and Kinross. Climate change will have an impact on everyone in Perth and Kinross. We believe that a resource efficient and climate resilient area will not only be a better place to live, it will also be a fairer, more competitive and better placed to ride out future climate change issues and economic shocks. Working together, we can share our commitment to tackling climate change and protecting our area. So we pass it on to the benefit of the future generations that live in Perth and Kinross. Happy to move the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Climate change is real and we all have a duty to act and to do our bit. We must all lead by example, and over the past few years the Council has attracted over 49 million in external funding since 2010 for projects contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reduced the total energy consumption from our buildings by 17% since 2012, despite increasing the number of operational buildings, and has reduced the average level of general household waste collected every week by 46% since 2013. And additionally, there are now over 80 electric car charging points available to the public in Perth and Kinross. And as colleagues will now have realised, Councillor Braun took ownership of an electric car just very recently. Councillor Illingworth has stolen my thunder in his comment on using too much paper, but it does worry me to look around the room and see so many members arriving here with bucket loads of paper. These are not infallible, I accept that, but they are the way forward. And I think we all have to lead by example, not just the Council, but us as elected members. Happy to second.
Thank you very much for your comments, and I take it all on board. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I know there's a mountain to climb on this, but we have heard in the first presentation that Perth and Kinross needs to be ahead of the curve. And we have heard in our second presentation today that collaborative working is the way forward. So I'm just wanting to highlight that I was very happy to attend the Perth West Heat Strategy Stakeholders workshop that was recently put on by the Council. I was delighted to see that attending that workshop there was not only people within our own departments, but also with the building companies who are actively looking to embrace ways to take balanced energy homes. Now I know that the election had not long been called, and I know that many councillors couldn't actually attend that. It was an exceptionally informative meeting, and it certainly shows that this council is making active steps already in talking and communicating with many sectors to move this position forward, and I wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This has been an excellent report, and I welcome it, though I have one small criticism, that Perth Harbour has not been included in this paper and that is disappointing. Every ship that arrives at the harbour cuts down travel of 80 HGVs by a considerable distance, and more focus should be given on promoting Perth Harbour as a component in climate change. If we can get goods closer to their final destination, this will cut down diesel emissions. This surely is a benefit to the whole area. I may have got this wrong, but unless there has been consideration to the harbour given, how is it possible for us to find out if this is a mitigation or not? And are we getting the complete picture?
Thank you very much. I'm quite sure that will be included at the harbour. But if it hasn't been, it will be now, but I'm quite sure it will be there. Because this is for the whole of Perth and Kinross. It's not just the council in isolation. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. When the First Minister declared a climate emergency back in April to a packed auditorium in Edinburgh, I, along with other colleagues, was lucky to be there watching and listening. It was a call to action, and I knew as a council we needed to step up to the plate. I was proud to second the motion that Councillor Waters proposed in June, and I've been proud reading this report. The work that has already been undertaken and the funding secured is impressive, and my thanks goes to the many officers involved, as well as particularly to Keith McNamara and Peter Marshall for the leadership they have shown. I recognise that this is very much an interim report and a first step, but for a first step to have such a detailed roadmap is to be applauded. As highlighted in the report, we must make sure our climate change transitions are just, fair and equitable. Climate change will hit the most vulnerable, and our policies cannot leave anyone behind. I look forward to working with officers and crucially with members of the public, our community planning partners and the third sector. As public servants, this will be one of the most important issues, if not the most important issue we tackle in the years to come. With tough decisions ahead, I hope this will be a priority in budget decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I welcome the commitment and effort that officers have put into this key interim report. Dealing with climate change is the key issue facing our planet today, and this report shows the clear challenges we face as we aim to meet our responsibility in becoming carbon neutral. One of the challenges running through this report is a question over the speed which we will bring in the changes required to meet our commitments, especially our commitment to lead by example. It is imperative that within the powers that we have, we do as much as possible to reduce our carbon footprint at the earliest opportunity. The dangers of stalling on this will create an even bigger and more costly challenges for this council in 15 or 20 years' time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. There's a huge amount in this paper, and it's all to be welcomed, but three main things occur to me. The 3% for which this council has direct control of must be used, if you like, to set the example. But the job's not going to be done unless we tackle the other 97%. And so we must, our main thrust surely has to be exercising influence where we can. And in that context, I note very much that transport emissions are 48% of the problem as represented here. And I would hope very much that I see that the list of engagement partners at the moment is indicative, but I hope very much, and I realise that the gentlemen have gone, but I hope very much that the Perth City Development Board is added to those lists of engagement partners very quickly, because they have the ability to impact on about a third of our population who we've got to influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I suppose the advantage and disadvantage of coming with your comment late on is many people have said the exact same things you're about to say yourself. And I think that's a good thing in a way that we actually all speak from the same hymn sheet and we're all highlighting the same issues. But the poorest in our society do suffer the most both from climate change, because climate change and social injustices go hand in hand. And also for the poorest in our society, the barriers to actually becoming net zero carbon free are harder. When I moved to Blairgowrie, through the Energy Saving Trust, was able to get a loan to change my oil-fired Rayburn into a wood pellet stove heating system. But I could afford that. I could afford the repayments.
We've heard Councillor Braun has bought himself an electric car. The car insurances for electric cars are astronomical compared to a normal car. So although the price of the cars may fall, will the price of the insurances fall as well? So there are barriers there for the poorest in our society to be taken along with this. And that's probably going to be our biggest challenge, because the middle classes and those involved will take advantages of the carrots given to us by Scottish Government. They'll take the HEAP funding, they will renew their roofs, they'll put solar panels on, they'll take all these advantages because they can afford to pay a little extra every month. What are we going to do for those who can't pay that little extra? How do we supplement them to come on this journey with us to the net zero economy? And that will be our biggest challenge going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Debra Provost. I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Forbes' comment. My vehicle is actually an electric plug-in hybrid car. It was recommended to me by Councillor Dugan. One of the things I actually agree with him for once with. Just to emphasise the point, the car is a 2.5 litre petrol engine. It weighs, with batteries, something like 2 tonnes. And recently I drove from Bridger-Cally to Scone Airport and recorded 249 miles to the gallon. This morning, driving from Bridger-Cally to the car park by the court, it was 159.1 miles to the gallon, which just shows that these cars do work and they do control emissions. Thank you, Debra Provost. And also thank you to Councillor Dugan again for his recommendation.
Thank you very much for all your questions and comments about this report. This shows this is one report where we're all united and we feel we can all do something. And it's one report that we can actually, as individuals, all do something small. So I think with that, I'd like you all to make a New Year's resolution that you will all do one small little thing to help with climate change, and you can report back. Thank you. I will now pass back to the Provost.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I think we all 100% agree with your comments there. I'm proposing that we have a short 10-minute comfort break at the moment. Thank you, councillors. Item 9, Treasury Activity and Compliance Report, Quarter 2. Can I invite Stuart Mackenzie, to Head of Finance, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Section 3 of the report outlines the background to and rationale for the significant amount of Treasury activity undertaken during the quarter. The Council's 10-year capital budget is front-weighted, with many projects due to be delivered in the early years of the programme. The estimated borrowing requirement to finance this expenditure is approximately £369 million over the next 4 years. During the quarter, PWLB borrowing rates, particularly for longer-term loans, fell to a 30-year low. In the context of a significant borrowing requirement, £150 million of new borrowing was undertaken during the quarter, £100 million of which was borrowed at fixed rates below 2%. Over the 50-year life of this new borrowing, the savings on interest costs are estimated at £51 million at current prices when compared to forecast future borrowing costs. As a result of increased borrowing activity by local authorities, the UK Treasury implemented new lending arrangements on the 9th of October, which increased borrowing rates by 1% with immediate effect. The significant level of new borrowing undertaken during the quarter resulted in the commensurate increase in investment activity. As set out in Section 4, the Council's total investments increased from £72 million to £184 million at the end of the quarter, with investment income increasing to £1.3 million. The level of investments will, however, reduce over time as the Council finances its capital programme. The approved investment limits were temporarily exceeded during the quarter due to the level of borrowing undertaken. All investments undertaken during this period were, however, made with low-risk Council-approved counterparties, mainly high street banks, and the position was corrected at the earliest opportunity with the approval of the revised lending and investment policy by Council on the 25th of September. Happy to take questions, Provost.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. Any questions on the report? Councillor Donaldson, right away.
I usually do ask questions on this section. Can I just make a comment first of all? And that is on point 4.2. And I think the activity that's been undertaken in the third quarter, it's impressive. But can I just ask, first of all, and then I do a one supplementary, could I ask Stuart Mackenzie, on an annual basis, would I be right in saying it produces a saving, what you've done, of about 1.1 million recurring?
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Yes, approximately around that figure. There's a recurring saving. There's also a reduction in what's known as a consolidated loans fund rate, which is a rate we use when providing an estimate of the cost of capital investment for the capital programme. Because we've undertaken this borrowing, it drives our overall interest costs down.
Brief, an important follow-up. First of all, though, I think the timing really has been impressive, and I think it just stands out. But going forward, would it be right in saying you're going to make far less recourse, given the UK Treasury's decision to make that 1% increase across the board, to PWLB funding? What other sources, can I ask Stuart, just an update from Policy and Resources, what other sources are you looking at as sources of finance? Might that even include, would we have the ability, or are we just too small as an organisation to issue our own commercial paper?
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Just to provide a little bit of context, the PWLB borrowing rates as at today for 50-year money is 2.95%. So although we've seen a 1% increase in borrowing costs across all borrowing periods, the actual rate itself is probably around about what we've seen is over the last 3 to 5 years. It will come as no surprise to elected members that some of the banks have acted on the back of the increase in PWLB borrowing. So we're looking at some of the products that may be available from these institutions. My apologies, your third point, Councillor Donaldson, was?
Are we too small a local authority to actually issue our own commercial paper, or just would the expenses counteract your doing that?
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Members may be aware of the experience of Aberdeen City in issuing a bond. It brings its own challenges in terms of the governance climate, which Aberdeen works in, so they're now governed by FCA regulations as much as the codes of practice we have locally. But to answer your question directly, that's just an area we haven't explored at the moment. There would be significant cost and significant governance costs in issuing a bond. Aberdeen City did it in the context of a very significant single capital investment. We are not at that stage yet, but it wouldn't be a route we could discount.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost. The economic background very kindly states that unemployment in the EU is 6.3%. Do you have a figure for the? Do you have a figure for the UK?
Apologies, Councillor Illingworth, I'm actually flicking through the report myself. If it's not included within the report, I'll provide that for you.
If there's no more questions, Councillor Lyle, can I ask you to move the report?
Thank you very much, Provost. In line with best practice, elected members are provided with a quarterly update on Treasury management activity. This report sets out the activity for the period from the 1st of July to the 30th of September 19. The Head of Finance has already provided elected members with further commentary on the activity set out in the report. As the Head of Finance had advised, the Public Works Loan Board increased the level of borrowing in early October. This increase was unannounced and came into effect without warning. Fortunately, the Council's proactive approach to Treasury management meant that we had already taken advantage of the historically low rates that were previously available. This approach has secured significant savings on the cost of borrowing to this Council going forward. Provost, during the last quarter, the approved investment limits were breached temporarily. However, I am confident that elected members will agree with me that the financial savings accruing to the Council on this borrowing makes this technical temporary breach acceptable. The Public Works Loans Board increase I referred to earlier further justifies the proactive position taken by this Council. Councillors are asked to note the contents of the report and also to note the annual review of the Treasury management systems in the document. I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Duff, to second.
Thank you, Provost. I thank Mr Mackenzie for his report on Treasury activity and commend him and his team for the very prudent and proactive handling of Council's fiscal matters. I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Are there any comments on the report? No, we agree the report? Thank you. Item 10, the Equalities Performance Report. Can I invite Barbara Renton, Executive Director, to introduce the report?
Thank you, Provost. This report provides an overview of our Equalities work as an employer and service provider, demonstrating our commitment to equality of opportunity and how equality outcomes have been achieved during 2018-2019. This is the second annual Equalities Performance Report and is now a firmly established part of our overall performance reporting cycle. The report clearly lays out why equality is at the heart of what we do, as all services demonstrate how much equality is part of their mainstream day-to-day work, as detailed in full in Appendix 1. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Barbara. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Mrs Renton, for the report. It's very welcome. On page 4 of the report, on page 373 of our papers, the Council is quite rightly committed to equality of opportunity as an employer. And as a member of the Employee Consultative Committees, I can attest that, in fact, we continuously look to see how we can reduce any inequalities and improve the opportunities for our staff. My question, though, is in relation to our recruitment processes and how we can ensure that Perth Kinross Council is an employer of choice and that is receptive to applicants with disabilities, whether they be physical or sensory impairments or others. And that's not just about how we profile our job descriptions and our workplace, but also the physical environment in which we expect people to work. So if somebody could provide me with some update on that, it would be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Karen?
Councillor McCall, I would say that it's an area for continuous improvement and we're never complacent that we have done enough, but we have recently had accreditation for being a disability confident employer at the highest level, so that is some external validation that we are taking a range of positive steps, but I would say that that's something that we would always wish to see where we can improve. We have engagement with people who apply for jobs with us to ask for their ideas and how we can improve the processes. So there are a number of ways that we look to ensure that we're continuously improving our approach to ensure that we remain an employer of choice and are as accessible as possible to employees who have a range of challenges, including disabilities.
With that.
Yes, thank you. I'm aware that there is work being done, but I think that when I look around the Council, I see very few people who are employed with any type of disability or sensory impairment. I look at our physical environment and it's not conducive to people, to certain ways of moving around a building. And so I think it would be perhaps worth considering, and maybe I could ask if they could do that, to look at some specific targets and perhaps do some more in-depth analysis of A, do we get applicants coming forward in the first place, and of those who do come forward and are unsuccessful, what deters them from either accepting or coming forward in the first place. So I think perhaps some more in-depth work on that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor.
Thanks, Provost. And really, it's a follow-on from my colleague's comment just then. Whilst I agree equality is extremely important, but I'm surprised we actually have to have a policy for it, because we should be all-inclusive anyway. And not all disabilities actually are visible. So, you know, there probably are people with disabilities here. But I think we should just be employing the right person for the job, regardless of whether male, female. I've said this before, but I just don't want to get bogged down into ticking boxes for the sake of ticking boxes.
Thank you, Councillor James. Any other questions? Do you want a supplementary?
No, if I may, Provost, I think perhaps Councillor James misunderstood what I meant. I wasn't talking about gender equality. I was actually talking about how we structure our job descriptions, how we do, for example, do we make sure that our advertisements are available in Braille, for example, or in other languages? Do we make sure that we have a physical environment that will enable people who may have a physical impairment to move around easily around the building? So it wasn't just about gender issues, it was much wider than that in its broadest sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Blanty. Councillor, please, thank you.
Thank you again, Provost. This report provides members with the second annual Equalities Performance Report, highlighting the range of work undertaken across this council, both directly and in partnership, to meet our statutory equality outcomes during 1819. This report provides firm evidence of our continued commitment to making Perth Kinross an accessible, inclusive and safe welcoming place, as well as evidencing our commitment to fulfilling our equality obligations as an employer. I commend this report to members.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett, you seconding the report?
Thank you, Provost. I'm very pleased to second the moving of this report by Councillor Lyle and commend it to colleagues. Our equalities work is a source of personal pride to me, and I want to thank all the council staff, both individually and collectively, who have contributed towards achieving better equalities outcomes for residents in Perth and Kinross. This report gives an extensive overview of our activity across all council services. And in particular, I'd like to make a specific mention of some key areas of activity during the previous year. During 2018-19, we put in place our first British Sign Language plan and accompanying information on the council website. I myself joined BSL community members at a number of events throughout the year, supported by BSL interpreters, and have seen the satisfaction at first hand and the enjoyment that has been taken from taking part in those events, such as the Halloween history tour, the Riverside Night Lights, and an accessible stadium tour at McDermott Park, all of which were events that members of the community wouldn't have otherwise considered going to or have attended. We remain the only Scottish local authority with a specific Gypsy Traveller strategy, and I know that this influenced the drafting of the recently published Scottish Government and COSLA Improving Lives for Scottish Gypsy Travellers report, where a good number of members of the Gypsy Traveller community from the Women's Voices project in Perth and Kinross took a very active part. Our Show Racism the Red Card programme remains the longest standing partnership agreement in Scotland, and I joined a number of councillor colleagues and senior officers in a schools workshop held in these chambers earlier this year, which was very informative. Our LGBT History Month programme was independently valued as the best in Scotland for the second year in a row, and of course Perthers' pride goes from strength to strength. I want to commend all our staff involved in organising our first ever Pride March, which was a marvellous, open and joyful celebration of diversity and inclusion, which stands in stark contrast to the very recent incidents of haters who've been skulking around our city centre, promoting the message of white supremacist and far-right extremists. We don't want and won't tolerate their poison in the heart of our fair city. And I want to thank our community wardens and the police for the swift action in taking those posters down. Provost, I want to return to the positives, the Keep Safe Place scheme, making our city centre a more welcoming place for people with a disability, knowing where they can turn for advice and assistance in the city centre, and almost a 50% increase in the numbers of local businesses involved in supporting that scheme. Just short of 12,000 people attending local multicultural events, and our second Holocaust Memorial exhibition are among the highlights. The formation of a disability staff network, and I think the disability staff network may well be the forum to address some of the issues raised by Councillor McCall. In addition to our LGBT plus staff network, marks progress towards an equal opportunities Perth and Kinross Council workplace. The actions contained within our child poverty plan and a partnership approach to supporting communities, tackling fuel poverty, maximising tenants and residents' income, and making living costs affordable require our sustained attention and resources targeted at those most in need. And I look forward to receiving reports on our continuing progress next year. And Provost, I'm very happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Rebbick, yeah.
Thank you, Provost. What local authorities and government say on equality and the tone of that conversation is very important, particularly if people are to be judged on the content of their character and not the nature of their disability, their sexual preference, the colour of the skin, the country they were born, or anything else for that matter. Dare I say it's a lesson that the UK government and its leader needs to learn very quickly. But we do it well locally, and I would like to commend this paper, in particular thanks to Dave McPhee and his team for delivering it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, I just wanted to add my comments that being able to speak at the opening of the pop-up event that was here at 2 High Street for the LGBT History Month, it was a wonderful event and a great start to things, including Perth Pride, and as we've heard that we had the march this year. A wonderful event, a great event for your family. I brought my kids along, and so much happening, and I hope that this is a sign of things to come for the coming years, that will increase our presence in these events. And I would like to echo the comments that Councillor Barrett has made, that there is no room for racism or hate speech in this city. It affects me directly as a member of a mixed race family, and I'm glad for the swift actions that were taken.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Thank you. Before asking you to agree the report, I have to agree I've been involved quite extensively as Councillor Barrett with the Pride events and the Gypsy Travellers, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're actually doing so and will continue to do so. It's a great benefit to our communities. Can we agree the report? Thank you. Deputy Provost will now take items 11 and 12 on the agenda.
Thank you, Provost. We now have the Chief Social Work Officer's annual report, so can I invite Jackie Pepper to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm very pleased to present this annual report for the year 2018-19 to Council. It's intended to assist Council to have oversight of the full range of social work and social care services across Perth and Kinross. As although the responsibility for social work and social care services for older people and some adults is delegated to the Perth and Kinross Integrated Joint Board, it's important that elected members maintain a good understanding of all social work and social care services in order that you are assured that statutory social work responsibilities are fulfilled, that you're satisfied that the service quality is being maintained, and that you're confident that risks are being managed effectively. This report draws together information and data into one place about how social work services are being delivered, what's working well, key challenges and sets out key areas for focus for the year ahead. The report identifies very positive performance has been sustained against a backdrop of increasing demand pressures, particularly in concerns about children, vulnerable adults and people who may need treatment for mental ill health. The report shows a strong contribution by social work and social care staff to public protection and improving outcomes for vulnerable people. And my assessment is that overall, our current arrangements are responding effectively to the increased volume, but that needs monitoring, and there's a need to examine alternative models of service delivery in order to maintain current standards should those trends continue. So over the next year, it will be important to learn lessons from case reviews. We have, along with partners in Angus and Dundee, commissioned research by Dr. Sharon Vincent of Northumbria University into case reviews carried out in Tayside since 2017. And this will provide an important foundation for our strategic approach to continuously improving public protection arrangements across all partners. And the findings will be shared with chief officers by the end of March, beginning of April 2020. So there's evidence over the last year that the robust approaches to performance management and self-evaluation within children's services are being maintained. The continued improvements in outcomes for children and young people in need of care and protection are demonstrated within the report. There are examples of very successful approaches to service redesign, such as the positive impact of REACH in reducing the need for and reliance on residential care for children and young people. The Criminal Justice Social Work Services Service continues to perform well against national measures and is well placed to respond to changes within the justice system, such as the presumption against short prison sentences. A joint inspection by the Care Inspectorate and Healthcare Improvement Scotland into the Health and Social Care Partnership concluded that there was a need to strengthen areas such as strategic commissioning, governance and planning structures. And I'm working with the Chief Officer and his team to take forward recommendations to improve performance management and to drive continuous improvement within an integrated structure. Nevertheless, within adult services, the strong partnership approach that exists at team and practitioner level is evident in this report. Determined and committed staff are continuing to deliver high quality of service to our citizens, and that 95% of people who responded to the Adult Social Care Survey report say that they are treated with compassion and understanding is a huge achievement and demonstration of the difference our social care and social work staff are making to the experience of our most vulnerable citizens. The Health and Social Care Partnership is experiencing financial pressures in relation to meeting the needs of an ageing population and increasing numbers of adults with complex health and disabilities. And a transformation programme is already underway to redesign models of support for adults with complex needs, and this will include work to address transitions from children's services into adult services. In 2020, we will see the introduction of a replacement IT system for all social work services. And as Chief Social Work Officer, I'm overseeing the programme board which will implement this. And this provides us with a unique opportunity to revise our current working practices and take advantage of new technology. And this work is on track, and the successful suppliers will be, the recruitment of the successful suppliers will conclude at midnight on Friday, the 20th of December. So in January, we'll be in a position to begin to engage with those suppliers. The Perth Kinross offer that we heard about earlier also provides an opportunity for social workers to engage with the most disadvantaged in our communities in a meaningful dialogue through trusting relationships that they already have. A key priority for the next few years will be to support the social work and social care workforce to manage change and adapt to new ways of working. And I'll be working closely with managers in health and social care, criminal justice, as well as services for children, young people and families to ensure that there is the required professional leadership, staff development and quality of supervision to support this. I'm happy to answer any questions, Deputy Provost, along with a range of colleagues that are here today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for the report. Are there any questions? Councillor Pover.
Thanks very much, Deputy Provost. Can I just ask Jackie, on page 430, The report refers to consultation with carers, and I would just like to ask, are the carers offered a carers assessment? And if so, to what extent are outcomes recorded under unmet need?
That's a very detailed question, and the carers strategy, the joint carers strategy for children and adult carers, was approved both at Lifelong Learning Committee and at the Health and Social Care Partnership at its previous meeting, and that sets out the arrangements in terms of the assessment and the recording of unmet need. I don't know if you're able to add any detail to that, Gordon?
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Pover, yes, the IGB on the 5th of November approved the carer strategy, and incorporated within it is a framework of performance measures that we will be reporting on regularly, which will identify the extent to which we are carrying out and offering carer support plans, but equally also will identify any situations where we are not meeting the assessed need of carers, and that will be reported back. Inform service planning, and it'll be key that we develop service responses that identify how we can better meet the needs of unpaid carers.
That's great, thanks very much. I'd be interested to hear the outcome of that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I wanted to ask a question regarding the picture that's provided on page 419 of the pack, page 17 of the report under mental health, which shows a picture of increasing short-term detention orders, increasing compulsory treatment orders, and a 50% or almost 50% increase in the number of assessments where detention was a consideration, as well as inpatient levels being higher than the rest of Scotland. Can you tell me what's behind this pattern and why we seem to be out of step with the rest of the country?
Thanks very much, Councillor Barrett. It's a helpful question, because what we're doing at this point in time, the mental health officers team and the team leader are currently in the middle of a deep dive and carrying out a case audit into all of the factors that are influencing this, and we will use that information and analysis to influence a local mental health strategy, and the mental health, we will inform the work of the Mental Health Alliance across Teesside as well. So we're currently examining that.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I will invite Councillor Lyle to move the paper.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Deputy Provost. The Chief Social Work Officer's report for the financial year 18-19 clearly shows the extent to which social care and social work services are supporting better outcomes for people who need care and support across Perth and Kinross. The Council has a responsibility to make sure that our social care and social work services are delivered to the highest professional standards. The Chief Social Work Officer considers that good progress is continued, and her report highlights how social care and social work services are responding to their new responsibilities, as well as the ever-increasing demand and associated budget pressures. The Chief Social Work Officer report makes clear that the key challenges for delivery of our statutory social work functions. The report illustrates how our staff have delivered sustained and improving outcomes for service users over the 18-19 period, also against a backdrop of increasing demand and volume. The report demonstrates how our staff work tirelessly and in a person-centred way to make sure that the most vulnerable in our communities experience good quality care through trusting and meaningful relationships. There are also encouraging signs that innovation and investment in new ways of working are beginning to address long-standing pressures in some areas. The results of external scrutiny also validate the excellent quality of work in our social care and social work services. This report to Council provides a valuable tool to gauge the quality of our social care and social work services. It is also pleasing to note that this remains consistently high and is through staff who are committed and extremely skilled in supporting our most vulnerable citizens. Provost, I'm happy to move this report.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. As Chair of the Integration Joint Board, I have to say it is most encouraging to read from the Chief Social Work Officer's report that despite the many workforce pressures faced, together with the increasing demand created by Perth Kinross's demographic profile and the requirement for complex needs packages, which is growing, a 95% positive response rate was received when service users were surveyed. At the same time, as Jackie has mentioned, continued improvements in outcomes for children and young people in need of care and protection are being made. Our staff are to be highly commended for the high standards they are working to, and I am sure full council will agree with me on that. Finally, as Jackie said, the Health and Social Care Partnership sure is facing significant ongoing financial challenges, and I would ask all colleagues to please bear that in mind in the forthcoming budget process. Happy to second this report, Provost, Deputy Provost.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Firstly, I want to thank the Chief Social Work Officer and everybody that's involved in putting together this report. Is quite comprehensive, and the reason I didn't have any questions, which might seem quite unusual, is because a lot of them were answered in the report, so thank you for that. However, I would say that I think this coming to councillors once a year is perhaps not quite sufficient, because there's lots of detail in here and we don't really have enough time to scrutinise it. And while I understand that the Health and Social Care Partnership does exist, a lot of the casework that comes to councillors does involve social care and the delivery of social care services to our constituents. And I would, perhaps my comment would be that some consideration be given as to how the wider elected members could be, at least have some sort of ongoing update as to what progress is being made in the various other developments that are taking place within the world of social work.
Thank you very much for your comments. Councillor, Crawford, Reid.
Surname, first name, hey Grant. Thank you for the overall report. I'd specifically like to congratulate and pass on the congratulations to the staff in Parkdale Care Home for its absolutely superb, well, excellent.
Excuse me, Councillor.
Sorry?
I wonder, Councillor, could you not speak loud while somebody's speaking? Thank you.
Believe it, I'm not worth listening to. Anyway, absolutely superb, excellent report about Parkdale, which I think fully vindicated the decision which was taken by the IJB about a year and a half ago to keep this vital service open in face of what was really quite significant opposition from NHS Tayside. So congratulations to Parkdale. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. First of all, I want to thank Jackie Pepper for the presentation and the report, and not just Jackie, but everybody else who's in the team. It's a big team. It's a very diverse team. I think there's many staff in the council and IGB have difficult jobs. I think one of the most difficult ones must be being a social worker. If you get it right, nobody notices. If there's anything goes wrong, then a wrath of hell will come down upon you. And sadly, that's sometimes the case. So I want to commend the report, commend the work, and also I hope Jackie can take back to all of the staff concerned, and that includes the IGB staff, our thanks for the work that they do and our commendation of the report today and all the good things that are within it. I come to Councillor Sheila McCall's point. I think it's a very good one. This report, just because of the annual churn, gets buried in a long agenda. I made the plea last year that the press, in the slack period of time when there's no council meetings, publicise all the good news in this report. They studiously avoided to do that last year, Deputy Provost. I will repeat the plea and make my
comments a bit more vigorous this year, so they can maybe take that on board. The report contains a number of challenges on adult protection. It's already been mentioned by several folk in the room. And continue to support children and their families. The continual expanding area of issues in mental health. And let's not forget criminal justice, where the implementation of non-custodial approaches is one that isn't always supported, but one that on an evidence base clearly results in far better outcomes than short-term prison sentences. I wish Jackie and her staff well with the IT system. I hope it works. And finally, Deputy Provost, good practice. There's lots and lots of really, really nuggets in this report of good practice. The carer support plan, the tech approach and dementia, good practice in transitions, work experience for the Fairview young people, social prescribing, Tayside suicide app, and the family change consultation service. And if any of the media representatives who are here today want a personal briefing on that, I'll forgo coming to lunch early and speak to them for 5 minutes about where they can find these points in the plan. Thank you for doing the report, and please pass on our regards and best wishes to the staff concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson, for your comments. I'm sure we all agree that the staff do a wonderful job, and they will be doing it over the holiday period as well. Are there any other comments? If not, we're happy to agree this report. Thank you. Now we move on to paper 12, the Perth Kinross Child Protection Committee Standards and Quality Report. And I'm delighted to welcome Bill Atkinson, the Independent Chair of the Child Protection Committee, to introduce this report. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. I'm very pleased to present this report and the following one in the next item, bringing, as they do, an overview of the services that are in place and the challenges that these services face in supporting and protecting the vulnerable children and adults in Perth and Kinross. And I think as a demonstration of the commitment of the Chief Officer Group to develop a more coherent approach to public protection in Perth and Kinross. To summarise in a sentence the work of the Child Protection Committee in the last year, it's been a busy one. And it's been a busy one really for two reasons. As Jackie's already referred to, there's increases in demand for services. And these are increases we've seen in the past, but not across the full extent of the system. In other words, in the past we've sometimes seen more early referrals not resulting in full child protection measures being taken and children being placed in the register. But for this year you'll see in the report that there's stresses throughout the system and pressures throughout the system. And we're obviously working on a multi-agency basis at how we can address these. And Jackie's clearly a key figure in that, in the work she's doing in relation to social work that you've already heard about. But we're also discussing with the police and discussing with our health colleagues about the challenges they face. And they'll be slightly different. To give you an example, health visitors' numbers have increased significantly over the last 18 months or so in Scotland. But what that does is create quite an inexperienced workforce dealing with the challenges and difficulties. So the multi-agency training that we're involved in through the Child Protection Committee becomes extremely important. The second main reason for the work or the busy feel of the work of the Child Protection Committee over the last year is that the strength of the committee for many years has been built on a commitment to self-evaluation and improvement. And we've continued to do that in a number of ways. We're involved under Jackie's leadership in a Tayside collaborative, along with colleagues from child protection committees in Dundee and Angus. And there's been a number of products, guidance for staff, a very successful conference, and as Jackie's already referred to, a very exciting piece of work that we're doing with Dr. Sharon Vincent in relation to how do we learn, really learn and make a difference to practice from the number of significant case and initial case reviews that we conduct across Tayside. We're also involved in work with Strathclyde University through Celsius, continuing to look at imaginative and different approaches to addressing neglect. We continue to work with the consortium across the east of Scotland, learning from and sharing with us what works for us in Perth and Kinross across the east of Scotland. Jackie herself and Ross and others, including myself, contribute to national work through the National Network of Child Protection Committees. As you'll see in the report also, we've continued this year to undertake multi-agency audit, highlighting strong practice overall, but as we would expect, identifying some areas for improvement. And another key area for us has continued to be this year, trying to work out ways of effectively involving children, young people and their families in the child protection system. From the very early stages of how do we provide better information and advice about keeping children safe, right through to how do we make sure that families feel who are subject of child protection case conference, for example, that they're having a say in the care plan that's being developed with and for them. So I hope the report also identifies that we have plenty of challenges to face and plenty of work to undertake, and our improvement plan is regularly updated, and we can give you, if necessary, an update on some of these items because this report was written as of the end of August. That's all I want to say by way of introduction. We've got Ross and obviously Jackie and Hazel and others here who will be able to provide you with any further information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Are there any questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Bill. Thank you for that. And it's a very good report, and I appreciate it. I'm actually looking at page 11 of the report, which is 465 in the pages, which is showing a 5-year low on parent alcohol misuse, but a big surge in parental drug misuse. Now, I can see from the report that it's saying that this is down to an alert workforce and through more support and partnership, but obviously at some point that curve's going to go the opposite way. Can you give me some indication as to how long do you think it's going to take for the work that we're doing to actually see that start to come down the other side, since we've got more people working in the environment?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. And we continue to recognise, and in fact, Dr. Sharon Vincent-Work recognises the connections between parental substance misuse, drug and alcohol misuse generally, domestic violence and mental health has been some of the key challenges. Toxic trio, it's sometimes referred to, that face families and can affect risks to children and protection plans. We're working very closely with the Drug and Alcohol Partnership in Perth and Kinross, and through the work that we do with them, we also have developed a very active programme of training for making sure that staff are alert, not only alert in terms of identifying issues of drug and alcohol issues, but also are able to meaningfully and supportively respond to that. Now, intervention in itself is not the answer. It has to be early intervention and early support and education. So I've not answered your question specifically because I don't think there is, and I wouldn't want to commit myself to saying that we will suddenly see these figures coming down. It's a combined, as most aspects of child and adult protection, it's a combined approach, and certainly, as I mentioned in my introduction, the improvement of our public protection services and a closer connection and integration of all the different elements of public protection will have an influence in that too.
Yes, you may.
Then I'm going to ask a wee follow-up if that's okay. Can you then give me an idea, do you anticipate a trend of drug use continuing with alcohol diminishing, or do you see the two very much linked?
I'm not sure. Hazel sits on in fact, the chair of the Alcohol and Drug Partnership in Perth and Kinross, so she would be better able to answer that detailed question than I would.
Your question's very relevant, and it's something that we've been considering over some time now. Things are not in place yet, but we have developed what we've termed our whole family approach, recognising that, you know, trying to address child protection issues while a parent has substance misuse issues is not going to happen unless you're looking at that whole family situation and doing that collaboratively. There is also you know, funding that's been made available through the Alcohol and Drug Partnership to look at this, and Bill's already mentioned the importance of training. We have multi-agency training. We also have a bid in at the moment to do motivational interviewing training across our adult service colleagues and also children's service colleagues, so everybody would be working from a similar framework. All of these things will begin to address those issues. We are seeing a surge of drug use. Alcohol misuse is there all the time. I mean, I think you don't need to walk far from the store to see some of the issues that presents for Perth and Kinross. But, you know, I mean, I think there are a number of ways that we're trying to tackle alcohol use and drug misuse across Perth and Kinross, and that hopefully that will all begin to see an improvement.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No, if there are no more questions, I'll invite Councillor Shires to move the report.
Quite sure what happened there. Deputy Provost, I'm delighted to move this report. As we know, it's everyone's job within this council to protect our children and young people, and this report demonstrates that Perth and Kinross Council remains resolute in its commitment to do just that. It was very welcome that the Care Inspectorate found that the business model of our Child Protection Committee was an example of good practice nationally almost 2 years ago now. And this report in front of Council today shows that the good work to ensure continuous improvement is in fact ongoing. I'm sure we all welcome the close working of the Council and our officers with all of our partners, and the development of this highly effective working practice is especially pertinent given the increasing volume of activity as outlined by Bill Atkinson. The report highlights that staff are identifying those who need protection and keeping them safe wherever they are across Perth and Kinross, and given the rurality of our area, that's no small challenge and extremely important. It's also particularly encouraging to see some strong evidence of the impact of more independent support and advocacy as a result of budget motion money in last year's budget. This is helping children and young people to be increasingly involved and to have their voices heard in the child protection process. I'm sure I speak for all of us in this chamber that we know that we can never be complacent, and we encourage all moves to increase the voices of children and young people in ensuring we listen to those voices as we seek to keep them safe. Our thanks must go to all those who serve on the Child Protection Committee for their relentless focus and drive towards excellent practice and ensuring the safety and protection of our children and young people. And because they're here in the chamber, I'd particularly like to thank Bill Atkinson, Sheena Devlin, Jackie Pepper, Hazel Robertson and Ross Drummond and all of their colleagues for all of the dedicated work that they do on behalf of children and young people and their families right across this council area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I invite Councillor Lyle to second.
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. We can never be complacent in such an important area as child protection, but it is clear that the extensive work of the Child Protection Committee across all relevant services and working with key partners is clearly supporting the arrangements for keeping children and young people safe. It's everyone's job to protect our children and young people, no matter what particular role they play in our communities. And Provost, I'm happy to second the paper.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor Wilson.
Deputy Provost, thank you. And I'm going to be brief and uncharacteristically for me. Caroline's pinched one of my lines, so I'll try and be even briefer. Firstly, I want to thank Bill Atkinson for his presentation and also for his leadership in this. I don't know quite the role as used to be the gamekeeper and now the gatekeeper, maybe Bill, but your support and help in this process is appreciated. And I just want to associate myself with Caroline's remarks about Sheena and everyone else, and Jackie, Hazel and Ross. If ever was an example of folk putting their shoulder at the wheel, you guys do it. So thank you for that. We've had previous good reports, Deputy Provost, and that's very easy to think, well, we've made it. But this team don't rely on laurels and don't rely on complacency. What they do is they say, okay, we've done well so far. How are we going to keep that up? How are we going to even do better? And this process of iterative learning, if I can call it that, is really, really important. Self-analysis, self-criticism, and always trying to find out how things could be improved and done better. And Bill has given us good examples of that. So thank you for all of that. I'm going back to my friends in the press table again, but if you want to get the nub of this, go to page 459, and this is infographic, is that the correct expression to use, that sums up a lot of the work. And if that doesn't convince you about the good work that's been done, go over the next page to the number 5 and the priorities on page 461. Our children and young people will be safe and protected from harm at home, at school and in the community. And there are still evil forces around in our communities, Deputy Provost. And these folk who are involved in this whole process are part of that whole protection. We should be part of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. No more comments. We've no more comments. Are we happy to agree this report? Thank you very much, Bill. It's lovely to see you back here again. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Item 13, Adult Support and Protection Annual Report. Can I ask Bill Atkinson back? Just stand there.
Thanks very much, Provost. Grateful for your interest in this. We're statutorily obliged to provide a biannual report to Scottish Government on the work of the Adult Protection Committee, but you as a council, I think, as a demonstration of a commitment to this important agenda, have asked me to produce this on an annual basis, and I'm grateful to you for that interest, although I appreciate that one or two councillors have heard this particular report at different other bodies already. Probably the key highlight for the work of the Adult Protection Committee over the last year is about how do we improve our collaboration. We've heard, and I'm grateful for the positive comments from you all in relation to Child Protection Committee arrangements, and we're trying to better connect adult protection and child protection. Vulnerable children often become vulnerable adults, and as we've already heard in relation to drug and alcohol issue, most children are on the child protection register because of parental issues to do with drug and alcohol, to do with mental health, to do with domestic abuse. So it's really important that we strengthen those connections and learn from each other, and we've been working hard to do that. In fact, we try and do things collaboratively and look for a reason, if there is a reason, to do them separately. So I think, and I'm hopeful that the Adult Protection Committee will benefit from that approach, and we will start to see some of the more sophisticated developments that exist around child protection also applying in adult protection. And one of these is, as I mentioned earlier, the work that we've been doing across other authorities, learning from them, sharing information, sharing experiences, and we're starting to develop that more in adult protection. We've got a group across Tayside looking at shared data, because as you'll see from the report, there's still work to be done in terms of the quality and the intelligence that's coming from the data that we're gathering at the moment in adult protection, with some fluctuations there that are difficult sometimes to understand. So we're doing work across Tayside on understanding what the data tells us, having a common data set to allow us to better compare and contrast and learn from each other. And as Jackie mentioned in relation to child protection, we're also now starting to look at initial case reviews and significant case reviews across Tayside. I'm pleased to report that in the last year there's been a national improvement programme set up by the Scottish Government, and again I think that's another indication at national level of a heightening of the profile, rightly so, of adult protection. And amongst one of the 6 themes that have been identified, one is about assurance, and a national programme of inspection will shortly be announced, and we'll, suspect, be part of that probably over the next year. And therefore we're in a strong position because of the work we've already started to do in terms of self-evaluation and improvement, and that will allow us to prepare as well as we can do, identifying our areas of strength, but also clearly identifying areas of challenge and improvement. And I suppose, just to finish, in relation to that, last year we identified the priority of greater involvement of carers and users, and we have seen an increase. You'll see that on the figures in relation to advocacy service and their input to adults who are subject of adult protection measures. But it has been a challenge for us developing the links. We've been working closely with the strategic group that oversees our strategy in relation to learning disabilities to see how we can link in to some of the groups that they support. We've been involved with the college. We're also working closely now with PCAFs. But this is an area that we need to continue to develop and to hopefully be standing in front of you next year offering probably more encouraging signs that we're really fully geared to hearing the voice of those who are caring for vulnerable adults, but also those vulnerable adults themselves, and that they have a meaningful say and influence in their care planning individually and in our service planning more generally. So that's all I would want to say by way of introduction to the paper. I'm happy to take questions, and Mary and Jackie and others are here to assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor McCall.
My questions hopefully will be quite short. Before I ask the questions, I want to just thank you for separating out learning disabilities from the elderly conclusion where it was before. I think it helps provide some clarity around where the targeted issues are. My question really is around 2 tables. One is on page 531, and it's around the adult support and protection activity. And there's quite a big increase this year that you've noted, but there's no indication as to what's maybe driving the increase this year, and perhaps if you could give us some information on that. And on the converse of that is on the table on page 532, there is a significant decrease in the learning disabilities category, and again it seems a little bit to buck the trend a bit, so perhaps you could give us some background to that one as well. It would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The vulnerable person referrals mainly come from the police, and we can see some fluctuation in that. I'm sure if police colleagues were here, they would be saying that they are a service for dealing with vulnerable people rather than a service necessarily for fighting crime. And a very high proportion of their time and their work is tied up in this area. What they are trying to do is develop more sophisticated ways of making sure that the needs of vulnerable people are met, and therefore they have hub arrangements to assess and pass on, if necessary, through to other services, including adult protection services, concerns they have got. So my understanding of that is that that's an increase in referrals coming through the police and then being passed on to us. And you'll see, because there's a relatively low number that are then converted into specific adult protection concerns, then that would suggest that whilst they have been screened and considered in need of a service, they've not needed even a follow-up inquiry through the adult protection system. So if you're asking me, I think it would be probably seen as an indication of the police being more and more alert to the circumstances that are dealing with, trying to gatekeep these to make sure that they're not passing on things that don't have a concern around vulnerability, but they are identifying in the way that in the past they would probably see but not do very much about, or able to do very much about in their day-to-day work.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any other
sorry,
questions?
there's a second part to the question. The following page was a decrease in learning disabilities. One of the issues, and it's probably tied to the decrease in large-scale inquiries as well, has been that we have a number, and I think it was 38, I think Gordon quoted 38 care homes yesterday at the IGB, which I thought it was 37 or 38, so it's around that number, a very high number of care homes resident in Perth and Kinross, and a small number of these are for people with learning disabilities. And so initially some of our learning disabilities large-scale investigations are large-scale investigations involved in some cases learning disabilities. So one of the factors is that the number of large-scale investigations have gone down, so the number reported with learning disabilities has gone down. But that doesn't explain the size of the, and that's a matter again that we've been keen to further explore, and we'll certainly be doing that over the next year. We're below the, as you see, we're below the national average now. We've come down and dropped below the national average, so that's something that we would, and one of the main reasons why we want to talk to carers and vulnerable adults with learning disabilities as well.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Any other questions? Councillor Bower.
Thanks very much, Provost, and thanks, Bill. I just want to draw your attention to the bottom of page 537, and it refers to, in unsubstantiated cases, the issues that financial concerns was in 41% of cases, and that strikes me as still quite high. And I'm just wondering, obviously back in the day when I was involved in adult protection, that was also a concern, and I'm just wondering how difficult it is to gain evidence now. Is that improved, or what are your challenges when it comes to proving things like that?
Well, one of the strengths of
Thank you, Councillor Pover. One of the other areas that we're working at the moment, which became obvious last year before, was financial harm by paid carers. Alleged paid carers are going into homes, so you only have one word against the other. And so what we have done is we've worked with Police Scotland and our care at home providers to actually look at ways to do, because what always happened at one time is if a paid carer was suspected, the agency stopped them working, but then we couldn't get any proof. So we've now got new things in progress about things that we can do leading up to that. So you're right, sometimes it's one word against the other, and when you've got clients who've got varying degrees of capacity and recall, it can make it very difficult, but it is an area that we're working on.
Thanks very much, Mary. That's very reassuring. Thanks, Bill, as well.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Provost. Just a quick one. I'm looking at the pie chart at the top of page 534. It has the who harms by category. Just a quick question. What's the difference between the category other and the category not related?
That's the not related refers to the one above, which is the relative. So that's is that right, Mary? Yeah, sorry. We're breaking down who harms the individual. The paid carer, that's somebody who's paid a relative, and it's somebody who is known to the older person, for example, but not related to them.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions, paper, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thank you to Bill Atkinson for introducing the previous few items and answering questions so completely. People who are unable to safeguard their own well-being or property have a right to live independently where possible and free from harm. This report captures the main activities of the Adult Protection Committee over the past year, and annual reporting has been introduced by this Council to ensure that elected members receive regular assurance about the service to protect adults from risk and abuse or neglect. The committee is being more focused on using data to inform decision making, to evaluating the impact of its work through self-evaluation and audits. Protecting vulnerable adults will only be effective through collaboration across wider public protection arenas. And there is a commitment to developing closer working relationships between the child and adult protection committees. Over the past year, we have seen an increase in the number of vulnerable adults being referred, with almost all being screened within 24 hours. For those which lead to further intervention, it is reassuring to note that over 80% of the people report that they feel safer as a result of the interventions. There have been a pleasing progress in tackling financial harm in partnership with local banks and in working closely with local care home and care at home organisations to ensure that adults at risk of harm are identified and protected. The Adult Protection Committee is developing greater oversight of adult protection and has identified a number of key priorities for the next year. These are included within the improvement plan before you. As with our arrangements for protecting children, our staff will be working around the clock across the Christmas break and managing the out-of-hours helpline, and will respond to any concerns about vulnerable adults 24/7 throughout. Thank you. I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you in particular to Bill and to Mary for their comments today. You mentioned yourself that you've given this presentation 1 or 2 times, and I think I've listened to it 4 times so far, including twice in the last 24 hours. But I have to say that every time you speak and every time people ask questions and you give answers, I learn more and more about what a valuable job you and your committee are doing. So thank you so much for that. And you know, as a former welfare guardian of a severely disabled, vulnerable adult myself, I see the importance of the work that you are doing and wish you well in your continuing endeavours. So without further ado, I'd like to just second this report and congratulate you on your efforts to date. Thank you.
Thank you. I would echo those sentiments, Bill. It's not always nice to see you anyway. You're always smiling. Are there any comments on the report? No? Agree with the report? Item 14, review of parliamentary constituency polling districts and polling places. Can I invite Jim time to introduce the report?
Thank you, Provost. Councillors, the paper before you sets out proposals for changes to the parliamentary constituency polling districts and polling places within the area of Perth and Kinross. This review is a duty which falls upon the Council to update on a 5-yearly basis. It seeks to ensure that polling places and stations are fit for purpose and are not operating beyond their original capacity. Each recommendation is subject to a risk and financial assessment to ensure that the Electoral Commission's requirements are being met. Suggested changes were identified during the review's consultation period and have been included where possible. I am happy to take any questions.
Any questions on the report? Councillor Parrott.
Provost, I have an amendment, if I may.
Yep.
Sorry, just point of order. We haven't actually moved
Just
paper
questions
yet.
we've got at the moment.
Okay, I'll wait.
Any questions on the report? No. Councillor Lyle? Councillor Lyle?
Thank you very much, Provost. The Council is required by law to undertake a review of polling districts and places at least every 5 years. The last full review was completed in 2014. Proposals were included in a consultation process between the 11th of October and the 22nd of November. The responses to the consultation are included within the report before members today, and I'm happy to move the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Provost. Happily formally second the report.
Thank you. And it appears we have an amendment. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Provost. I believe there is copies of the amendment to be circulated. And in the interest of brevity, I won't go on at length, but some of us remain concerned that the electorate of PCW and PLJ in Wards 12 are not best served by the present polling arrangements and the arrangements contained within the paper, and would present this amendment as a way of resolving that going forward. Thank you.
Have you all time to read and digest it? Yep. Councillor Lyle, would you like to comment?
Potentially I need a seconder to the motion first. Sorry, or your amendment.
Can I move an amendment, or second the amendment, Provost, if I may? As somebody who travelled around all Perth City polling places last Thursday, there's no question in my mind that the worst located one is, in particular, the one in Fuse Road when it comes to the Ward 12 constituents that are required to vote there. It's over a mile. There is no bus route, and I personally experienced a number of elderly ladies who were unable to get to the polling station without assistance. That's unacceptable, and so I have no hesitation in seconding the motion, the amendment, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yeah, given the comments just made and the amendment is asking for a further assessment, I'm happy to incorporate the amendment into the motion if members are happy to accept that.
Thank you. I would be happy with that. Thank you.
Agree? Thank you. Forgot to say.
That's okay. Thank you, Provost.
Can we agree to the amendment to the Scheme Administration and Planning Scheme of Delegation as set out in the agenda? Agreed. In addition, can we also agree a further correction to the Scheme of Administration in relation to Part 2, Section 12.2 on the local review body? The quorum for meeting should read 3 instead of 2. Is that agreed? Yep. And
Provost, did we not receive notification of that sort of thing?
It's in the papers.
Is it? Excuse me.
Yeah. Item 16, additional item is membership of committees. Scrutiny Committee, can we agree that Councillor Anne Jarvis be appointed to the current vacant position for the administration on the Scrutiny Committee? It's on the back.
Sorry, where are the appointments?
No. It's on my note. They're not on there. It's an additional item. So it's been added since you got the papers.
Another benefit of electronics then, Provost.
Sorry?
Another benefit of the electronic system, Provost.
Provost, it might be helpful just to clarify, in relation to item 15 on the amendments to government documents, the point regarding the local review body was an additional proposal that the Provost just made that wasn't on the original agenda, and the item that we've just made, Provost has just said there about the members of committees, is an additional item to what was included on the agenda. However, the Provost was happy to include it in order to fill the vacancy. So it wasn't included on the agenda, and so it wasn't issued electronically. So the Provost is raising this as two additional items of business.
So point of order, Provost, can I ask what your justification is under the standing orders for ruling that these items are urgent and why they weren't included on the agenda?
Councillor Purvis, I feel they're urgent enough to do it at this moment in time. Okay. Now we've now got to McDade. Sorry, yes.
Sorry, Provost. I think it would be helpful if, when we haven't got things in front of us, if you could go a bit slower in reading out what is being proposed, so that we actually have time.
My apologies, we're now looking at 20 past and we have another meeting. I was trying to rush things through.
I understand that time is rushing on, but actually we need to understand what we're approving in case it's quite important.
I appreciate that, yeah, I appreciate that. Can we now move to private business?
You know, I think we need, could you please go back through the stuff?
Where do you want to? Right, where do we want to go back to? Yeah, please.
Councillors, can I just clarify, the change to the quorum of the LRB was an oversight, it wasn't picked up when the scheme of delegation was done. It's the legal requirement set out in the legislation that the quorum is 3, which is why that part has to be amended.
Thank you. That's
You're happy with that?
helpful to know.
Okay.
Could we have the appointments read out again, please?
Provost, if I can just clarify again in relation to the additional item 16, membership of committees is in relation to the Scrutiny Committee, and the Councillor asked agreed that Councillor Anne Jarvis be appointed to the current vacant position for the administration on the Scrutiny Committee.
Okay, can we move on? So we now move into private business. Can I ask the press and public to leave the meeting, please?